Okay, so this happened 4 months ago. Just to give you an insight on why I decided to post now, well, here it goes. I have a restraining order on the roommates, and earlier today I saw them driving damn near too close for comfort towards my house. We still live in the same place. My significant other Kevin and I started working at the same place. We were homeless and, well, our boss had a place to rent and offered it to us and another couple who were also financially struggling, or so we thought. Everything was fine for the first month or so. Then it went sour. The female roommate Susan started going a little, let's say, nutty. At first, Kevin and I accepted it as bitchiness, but as time went on, it got unbearable. So the rent and groceries were split 50-50, groceries purchased separately. Well, Kevin and I lived in our room for the majority of the time. We kept to ourselves and basically stayed out of the way. Susan thought since she and her significant other Rick had a child, they were the main renters and we just had a room. The first thing Kevin and I noticed was our food going missing. The second thing was we were the only ones ever buying supplies or groceries. And the third was that they would leave their 3-year-old unattended for hours and without asking or notifying Kevin and I. Finally, the fourth thing was we were only roommates when it came to cleaning up after them. So basically, we were live-in help. There are so many things that have happened and not enough time to type it all out, so I'll just try to do one small incident until I get another chance to post again. So it started going sour after Kevin and I stopped providing for them, buying groceries, and stopped cleaning up after them. Susan began demanding things like where we were, what we spent our money on, and that I needed to get off my ass and take care of her family. Rick was also calling our boss and landlord and complaining about how rude we were for staying in our room all the time. That sort of shit. So here's the first encounter that kind of, well, freaked me out a little. Whenever Kevin wasn't around, Rick would make comments, sexual comments about my breasts and butt. I blew it off at first as he's just being nice, until he came waltzing into the bathroom. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. Each time the door was closed, locked, and I just got out of the shower. I'm thinking he was picking the lock. Luckily, every time I was wrapped in a towel. The last time, though, made my skin crawl. I was out of the shower and I barely wrapped a towel around me when the door flew open. I whip around to see Rick just standing there staring. I'm speechless. There's no way around him if he decided to do anything. After about a minute of just staring, it's as if he remembered Susan and Kevin were right outside and they could hear me scream if he tried anything. He just turns around and walks away. I'm still standing there hoping Kevin would sense my fear and come running, but he didn't. I told him what happened and he blew it off as an accident, but I'm not sure if it was. So I wrote about the experience I had with my roommates and coworkers. I didn't write every detail due to the limited time I had then. I've since left that job, and I'll explain why in just a minute. Sorry, but this is going to be long, and I'll try to just write what is most important to this story. Of course, the names in this story have been changed, but I promise you, it's 100% true. I started working at a guest ranch in Montana around September of last year. I had just moved back with my fiancé Kevin from out of state. He moved into his parents' house in another town for school, and I was staying at my uncle's house while working to move into my own place. The guest ranch was owned by an elderly couple, Will and Sherry. They seemed like good, conservative Christians, and the ranch was like something out of a fairy tale. Rabbits, deer, horses, etc. Mind you, this is a fairly small town, and I grew up here. Never heard of this place until a relative mentioned they were hiring, though. Now, the layout is odd, but important. The driveway is a long dirt road leading into a gate. once you're in the gate, you have horses on the left and cows on the right, behind some fences. There are 3 main buildings, a few yards past the first set of animal pens. The main house on the far left, the gift shop and office in the middle, and a shack of a mobile home on the far right. I mainly worked in the gift shop and office area. The gift shop was filled with dry mixes of all kinds, and after a week of training, I was the main producer of all those mixes, which wasn't easy as it was a very small kitchen located in the back of the gift shop. I was only able to use one giant pot to mix the flours and other ingredients in, bag them, seal, and pack them in a container to take them to the shipping and dining hall. Granted, this was off-season, so there wasn't any tourists at the time. Every room had 2 purposes. The kitchen was for producing dry mixes during the off-season, and the regular kitchen for the dining hall during tourist season. Well, you get the picture. Basically, there was never room or enough ingredients to fill orders fast enough. After a couple weeks working there, Kevin was getting tired of school and Sharon needed help with her computer. Knowing Kevin was very good with computers, I suggested he come to town and look at it. 2 days later, Kevin had a job as a bookkeeper. He worked for 3 days and stayed with his parents and went to school for the other 4. Eventually, he chose working over school and chose to move in with me and my uncle. I could go into the details on how we ended up homeless, but I won't. My uncle is a Vietnam veteran, and well, he's unstable, so we left. I mentioned this to Susan at work the next day, asking if she knew anybody we could rent from, but she had a better idea. I honestly don't know how it happened, but I agreed to be roommates with them, and we all moved into the shack of a mobile home. Being gullible and nice, I honestly didn't mind cleaning up after them the first couple weeks. Hell, I loved their child, and when asked to babysit, I would say yes. But that was the first couple weeks. After refusing to babysit, they would just leave her with me. No asking, no heads up or any of that. I stopped cleaning up after them because I started to notice that even if I hadn't used any dishes, the sink would be full after a day. Garbage was always strung out around the common rooms like the living room, hallway, kitchen, etc., and Kevin was the only one ever taking trash out. After I stopped cleaning, Susan started being bitchy. I don't just mean snapping once in a while, I mean knocking on Kevin and I's bedroom door and demanding us to come out for meetings. Yeah, I'm serious. These meetings usually were about Kevin and I not pulling our weight around the house. So we decided to just stay in our room and only come out to get some food that we'd purchased. That plan didn't last long, as our supply was going fast and we were hardly ever there. So we stopped buying food and went out to eat at fast food places after work. Fast forward to February, and Rick and Susan are now planning a wedding. The bitchiness Susan was displaying turns into a full bridezilla mode. Every few minutes she knocked on our door during the night. I want you to sew XYZ on my dress, and if my sister doesn't make it, I want you to fill in as a bridesmaid. Non-stop demanding. She and Rick were demanding that the house needed to be spotless. The dining hall, where the reception was being held, needed to be cleaned up and decorated. Kevin and I weren't invited to the wedding, so we didn't do any of that. Well, their family shows up 2 days before the wedding and they party all night in the trailer house, screaming, breaking shit, loud music, all while Kevin and I are trying to sleep and have work in the morning. Finally, it's the day of the wedding, and Kevin and I take off early in the morning, since it was my birthday. They knew this for months, and we went to have birthday breakfast. Well, Susan didn't like that, and demanded to know where we were, why, and how much money was wasted on something so stupid. I was livid. I wanted to move out right then, but Kevin convinced me to go cool off. I mean, this was months of shit building up, and I was about to throw my heels off and beat her ass on her wedding day. But I didn't. Instead, I let our boss know we were taking a day and left. The next day I go into work. The newlyweds are on their honeymoon. Well, Sherry comes up and asks why I wasn't at the wedding. I explained that it was my birthday and I wasn't invited to the wedding anyways. Instead of letting it go, she brings down the shame hammer and hard, saying how they expected me there and that I missed a very important event. Of course I felt bad, but I wasn't officially invited. I was told to help do the wedding shit, demanded more like it, but I was never told I was invited to attend. After the wedding, days went from 8 hours to 15 hours. Work was non-stop. Breaks weren't allowed. Not only did I have thousands of dollars worth of orders to fill, bus tours started showing up for sleigh rides and dinner. 60+ people came to eat, and I was the only one doing the cooking. Mind you, it's a small kitchen with a 4-burner stove. I can't stress how this kitchen wasn't fit for restaurant work. The bus tours came once a week and I would cook, serve, and clean up. I'd be in that kitchen cleaning until midnight, 1 in the morning. I'll get more into that later. March rolls around and Rick starts showing off his gun and talking about the warrants he has in other states. Around this time, Kevin gets a business card in his name so he can order things for the employees and for the business. Sherry and Will would take it to do things such as use it for a spa weekend, a new golf cart, and a brand new saddle for their granddaughter. Kevin even used it to pay other employees in cash for when nobody was there to sign checks. Again, this is important. So, Kevin takes out some cash to pay Susan and Rick. Well, he gives them roughly $400. Well, they call Sherry and scream that Kevin handed them the money rudely. Yeah, rudely. So Sherry calls Kevin and asks what was going on. Kevin explains step by step what he did and what he said. Sherry says okay and hangs up. Again, I wanted to leave because I didn't like that this psycho Rick had a gun, and illegally I might add. I was tired of the sexual advancements and crude remarks coming from Rick. I was really just fed up with it all. But again, Kevin convinced me to calm down and stay. Well, shit really hit the fan by the end of March. Sherry left to go to trade shows. The dining hall was a mess, and it was my day off. Susan came over and asked me if I could help her clean up the dining hall. I agreed and walked over to the building. Not even a minute after I stepped foot, Susan and Rick needed to go run errands and left. They were gone 8 hours, and during that time, I just cleaned, because it had to be done. When I was finally finishing up, Susan and Rick came back, and she grabs a cloth and starts wiping down the table. After everything was done, I tell her I've already done that and that I was done cleaning. She flips shit on me and starts screaming about how we're not besties anymore. I start screaming back, saying she was gone for 8 fucking hours and left me to do her job on my day off. Well, Kevin was in the office just outside the door, and Susan runs past me and says to Kevin, "Your girlfriend is insane." I walk through the door and she jumps behind Kevin and shouts, "Help! She wants to hurt me!" But not in a panicked tone, more like, well, seductive. That's when I get pissed and tell her to get the fuck out and not grab onto my fiancé like that again. Kevin stands up and tells me to go calm the fuck down. Mind you, she flipped her shit on me, and he's standing up for her. I get more pissed and tell her I want to speak to Kevin alone. She starts screaming louder this time and says, "I can be here. I can hear whatever you're saying." That's when Rick comes in and starts freaking out on me and saying I hit his wife, which wasn't true, but I should have. I asked Kevin if he's going to stand up for me, and he says he didn't see or hear anything. Granted, this is the same guy that blew off every time I told him that Rick got into the bathroom, said something about my breasts, etc., so what did I expect? Will comes in and breaks it up. I go home and start packing. Kevin comes in a little while later and asks me, "What the fuck?" I told him everything, and he says, "Well, you shouldn't have done it." I proceed to tell him that I can't work and live there anymore, and after a minute he says, "Fine, just go." The whole time Susan was listening through the door. Obviously, I didn't leave. I don't know what kept me there. It wasn't Kevin, it wasn't a good job, and the house was barely standing up. I guess it was just my ignorance. Well, things were very tense in the house after that. I was switched to nights, so I wasn't mingling with the roommates anymore. I left for work at 4 p.m. and came back at 3 a.m. It only took a few weeks, and before I know it, I was back in the dining hall fighting with Rick and Susan. I left to go to town. I came back to Kevin standing in the middle of the dining hall room. I asked if he let our dogs out since I left, before he could say anything. And Rick comes in with Susan trailing behind them. I remember word for word, as this was just scary as fuck, at least for me anyways. Rick starts in and says, "What? Were you talking shit again? What, can't say it in front of us, huh?" Susan began with, "What the fuck is wrong with you? We don't hang out. You don't fucking talk to me anymore." At this time, Rick walks by Kevin, who had just answered a phone call, and says, "I'm going to fucking kill one of you." I said, "That's a death threat," and I run out the door to go tell Will. Well, when we got back in, the place was just a huge screaming match. They were just screaming, and no words were coming out of their mouths. They were just straight up screaming. Will gets them to calm down, and I tell them I'm leaving the house and want to get my dogs. Will tells them to leave the room and has one of the wranglers escort me out the door. The second I get almost to the door, Susan jumps up and threatens to kill me. The wrangler is a big guy, and he moved fast between us and pushed me out the door. I get to the house, and all I grab is some clothing and my dogs, and I just leave. Back in the dining hall, Will asks Kevin what happened. Kevin just denied hearing anything. Well, after 2 days, Rick and Susan were let go and they left, but not before threatening us. There wasn't a restraining order anymore, due to a lack of evidence, so Rick and Susan have free range. Rick contacted me on Facebook last week, but I ignored him. Everyone was on edge for days after Susan and Rick left. Things around the ranch were going missing, the cow pen was being vandalized, resulting in the cattle constantly getting out and ending up down the road. Kevin and I had to clean up the house they destroyed before leaving. Later, we found out they used us to get into the mobile home and were in the process of trying to get us fired. Fired means we move out. Hence, the constantly calling Sherry to complain. Well, a few weeks go by and they start calling the business to harass us and Sherry. The calls contained death threats, police threats, and threatening the employees' families. That went on until they moved to California to live with family. Everything settled down once we heard they were no longer in Montana, and we went about our business as usual. Around the beginning of April, Sherry hired a woman. I'll call her Megan. Well, Megan seemed a little, cracked out. She didn't work at all. She liked to stand around and chat or made excuses to go home. I've caught her several times hiding in the pantry so she wouldn't have to work. Now, Megan was very tiny and very skinny, and she always wore a very big and baggy long-sleeved hoodie. She wouldn't take it off for anyone. We thought she was hiding needle marks on her arms. Well, she had a friend, Chris was his name. He was hired not long after Megan. Now, this guy was an ex-meth user, and he was trying to stay clean and work towards a better life. He was a great wrangler, awesome with the horses, and a really nice guy despite his past. He stayed even after Megan left, which, frankly, wasn't long. So, we needed more employees. By this time, the tourists started pouring in to stay in the guest cabins, and so we really needed the help. Chris mentioned his girlfriend was looking for a job, Anne, so we had to call her to come in and interview. Well, she was hired, and I tried to train her. She was very jumpy, jittery, and incoherent, so I suspected heroin right away, but I didn't say anything due to being short-staffed. Beggars can't be choosers, right? Well, Labor Day weekend came and Anne was freaking out over some tires. Granted, she worked maybe 4 hours a day since she started, leaving me to pick up the pace and finish, but this day seemed surreal. She was running around yelling and pissed off, saying she had to leave before noon to catch this guy who has her tires. I was fed up with her at this point and told her to go. Just to let everyone know, I feel like shit for what's coming next. She left and was let go the next day. Chris wasn't mad. He felt relieved, actually. Or he looked it. But Monday, he came in and wasn't his happy self anymore. Later, we found out he relapsed, but we forgave him. But he wouldn't tell us why he stuck a needle in his arm. Just kept on saying weird shit like, I don't know when everyone's so nice to me. I mean, I don't deserve it. We reassured him that he's a great guy. Still is, in my opinion. Well, a week later, he gets a call from Anne. She's screaming, panicking, and she told him the cops were raiding their house. At this point, he wants to leave and go get Anne, but Sherry stops him and says they'll arrest him. He ignores her and starts crying. I offer that he stay with us until he gets shit figured out. He agrees, so I go get some fast food in town. By the time I get back, he's gone, and Kevin told me he just got up and left, but not before giving him a Camel Zippo. Chris turned himself in for the murder of a 25-year-old guy who had stolen Anne's drugs a month prior. Labor Day weekend was when the guy was leaving town. Anne found out and left work to go find him with 2 other guys. Chris joined in afterwards. They took him to the woods and stabbed him multiple times until he was dead. I wish that I'd told her no. She couldn't leave that day. But I didn't. I was a huge pushover, but that day changed it. Nobody deserves to die over heroin. Chris didn't need to kill for his girlfriend. I don't know. It's kind of a mind fuck, and despite what Chris did, he was doing it for Anne. He didn't want to. A few days go by and we hear nothing about the murder. Then out of nowhere, Sherry gets a call from the police. Chris gave them the location of the murder weapon. It was under our house on the ranch. He hid it there right before he left to turn himself in. Sherry's freaking out as the police tell her they're on their way. She goes around warning the other employees and asking if they want to leave first. Most do. Kevin and I stay to watch. After about an hour, they dig it up. Sherry and Will are right there as well, and Sherry asks one of the officers to sweep this find under the rug. They agree and leave with the evidence. Here's the thing about Sherry. She claimed to know a lot of the legal officials here in this town. She also claimed Sherry wasn't her real name and she was in witness protection. She was very demanding, and I wish I could tell you everything she did, but I'll stick with a couple instances. She was always broke. Too broke to pay her employees, but not too broke to go buy things for herself. She would refuse to buy groceries to fill orders or make dinner for reservations, so I frequently had to go to my house and try to make a meal big enough to feed a lot of people. She also never took personal responsibility, and always had to blame others for her mistakes. She constantly blamed Kevin for her misplacing, overbooking, or forgetting to cancel someone's reservations. Basically, if you weren't there 24/7, she'd fucked something up and blame you for it. So, Kevin and I worked a lot of days with no days off. Soon, they all blurred together as we never really left. Sherry started in on our relationship not long after Chris left. She would say something to Kevin, then come in and tell me he was rude to her. I would go talk to him, and he would get pissed at me, resulting in me getting pissed at him. This went on for weeks. Our relationship was going down faster than Mama June's career. Eventually, I started looking for a house to buy. Mid-June, I think. Well, Kevin and I haven't received a payroll check since February, and Sherry kept on promising we would get our money once that $10,000 order was paid for. Kevin believed her, but I wasn't going to fall for her shit. But I didn't argue with Kevin due to our already unstable relationship. I kept working for her just so we could keep living in the mobile home. Sherry found out about me looking into buying a house and cornered Kevin and I in the kitchen and asked me if it was true. Me thinking it wasn't a big deal, I answered yes. Well, she flipped out and started crying and telling us we were hurting her feelings and that we're no longer loyal to her. I was dumbfounded by this. Before I could say anything, she runs out of the room and into her house. I stood there mouthing, "What the fuck?" to Kevin. After a minute, I went out to clean cabins. We had a tour group coming, so I hurried to get back in and start cooking. As I opened the kitchen door, there's Sherry standing there with a Wrangler, talking shit about Kevin and I. The only two people that came in early and left late. The two people that worked endlessly with no days off. Well, I got pissed and said, "I'm fucking done," and left. I didn't go back for 2 days, and I was in the middle of packing when Sherry came by to ask me to come back. Apparently, I was the only employee she had that worked in both housekeeping and kitchen, stayed late to finish cleaning and all that, and she didn't want to lose me. So I unfortunately went back. Just on a side note, I was a very nice person before working at that place. I would give my last dollar to help someone in need, and that's what I thought. I thought Sherry was someone in need. I wanted her business to work. I was working the jobs of 3 people, 15 to 20 hours a day without getting paid. I snapped before I left. Something in my brain had to have literally snapped because my family, my friends, they've all said I've changed, that I'm not me anymore. It's true. I don't feel anything these days. I worked at that place for a year. I endured sexual assault. I worked endless days. I was manipulated, verbally abused, and overall was treated like a slave. I witnessed unspeakable shit. Experienced unspeakable shit. So yeah, I've changed. The last day I was there, in late August of this year, I was working outside in housekeeping. I forgot some supplies for a stay-over cabin and went into the office to grab them. These guys came in and had a reservation. I signed them in and took them to their cabin. One of the Wranglers were taking a horse ride out with an elderly couple, and we were walking by. One of the horses started bucking with the old man on him. I run over and try to help while the Wrangler gets the old woman down. The thing about horses, if one goes crazy, so will the rest. So I'm holding this horse with the old guy on his back, and I'm trying to get them both to calm down, but it's not working. After the old guy's off, the Wrangler and I walk the horses back to the stall. This old couple had a dinner reservation, and I wasn't notified about that. Granted, there are 3 other employees who could have taken over cabins while I started cooking, or started cooking while I was out cleaning, but they didn't. Instead, I had to make a 3-course meal for 2 people, and fast. I forgot about the stay-over cabin at this point and started cooking. In less than 20 minutes, I have a meal provided from leftovers. I heat those up, serve them, clean up, and go home. The next day I come into the kitchen and Sherry's throwing dishes, screaming and cursing, saying she got a call from the guest in the stay-over cabin. Apparently, forgetting the extra roll of toilet paper was life-threatening. She then proceeds to say that the kitchen was disgusting and that I didn't clean it right. She and her granddaughter had to come in at midnight and clean it. Okay, so why is it still dirty this morning? I wanted to ask and call her out on her bullshit. I was also there way past midnight, and she never once made an appearance. She was throwing a hissy fit. Sherry then demands I write a letter of apology for the guests in the stay-over cabin, which was ridiculous. I tried explaining to her what happened, but she wouldn't hear it. After I wrote the letter and took a bunch of pictures, I left, sent Sherry an email stating that I want to get paid and that I'm no longer her employee. Kevin was fired a week later during her rant about me. We never got what she owed us. The business card Kevin had, she made him put in his name. She used it to buy her granddaughter a new saddle, Will a new golf cart that looks like a mini Mustang, and also used it to take a weekend spa trip. Not only that, she pinned all the business charges on us as well. By the time she was done, she said we owed her, which we denied. So yeah, we left and moved. Kevin got another job, I'm starting up my own business, and we moved into a nice house, but anytime we want to go anywhere, we run into Will or her. Take my advice. Leave a job the second your employer guilts you into staying because they can't afford to pay you. Oh, Rick and Susan moved back about a month before all that and are still currently employed by Sherry. I live in a very rural and mountainous area of California, and at this time, I was working as a cook in a restaurant/bar. I was 24 and not in the best place financially at the time, so I'd been borrowing my uncle's car to drive to and from work. I worked from 5 p.m. to 11 p.m. I know everyone in this area well, and I don't have a single enemy. I get along with everyone. One night, I had gotten done closing up the kitchen and decided to have a beer before going home. The bartender was talking to a fellow community member and trying to get him to go home. He was too drunk for his own good. There were some out-of-towners that weren't too fond of the locals' demeanor, and it seemed like it was getting intense between them. I just saw it as a local that I knew being annoyingly drunk, but perfectly harmless. I had my beer and went out and got in my car. I could see inside the bar and spotted the drunk local, completely smashed. I felt bad for not offering a ride home, but was tired from work and told myself he'll be okay. I drive away. Mind you, there's no street lamps, no buildings, it's in the middle of nowhere. Pitch black. Quiet. I realized about a mile from the bar that I should turn around and offer the local a ride home. He didn't live far, and it wouldn't be far out of my way to do so. I turn around at a muddy turnout and go back. I get in the bar, and I basically was short with the local, and told him I'd pick him up in the morning and he could get in his truck, sober. That I'll give him a ride home tonight. I was 24 at the time, and a small-built female. He was a smaller-built, 35-ish looking male. I knew this guy had hit on me in the past, but I assumed he was just a 35-year-old weirdo who was lonely. I always shrugged off his advances. Anyway, with a couple minutes of reasoning, he finally hopped in the car and I took off, driving towards his home, about 5 miles away on winding mountain roads. I didn't notice anything really at first. He seemed drunk, quiet, and mumbly. But not too long into the drive, he starts saying thank you, how nice I am to help him out. I say the usual, of course, no problem. Couldn't let him be there knowing full well he wasn't able to drive. This is where I start getting creeped out. I make a turn on the road where he lives on. It's a long road. Not many houses. All of the driveways are long, about a mile or two, so you can't even see the houses anyway. He gets really quiet, and it's dark in the car. I can't see him really well. I notice him look at me, though. I could see the reflection of his eyes from the dim lights on the radio. This is something I remember vividly. His eyes gleaming, kind of green from the lights on the radio knobs. He was just looking at me. I, without returning his gaze, said, "What's up? Why are you looking at me like that?" He says to me, "You're so pretty, and I never get this chance to be alone with you." I shrugged it off, trying to play it cool, although I'm beginning to regret my decision. All of a sudden, he reaches over to me while I'm driving and tries to put his hand on what I'm assuming was my breast, but instead his hands land on my shoulder and neck area. I start yelling at him to stop. I slam on my brakes in the middle of the road, and I scream at him to get out of this car now. I repeat it over and over. At this point, I had my hands off the wheel and was trying to physically push him out. I had leaned over and opened the car door. I had never in my life realized my own strength, my own weak strength. This 30-something guy wasn't budging against me. I noticed him laughing, a really sloppy laugh. He says, "You and I know that no one's around." I said to him, "We just left the bar. At least 5 people know where I'm going. Please, stop. Here's a flashlight. Walk on home. I'm done with you tonight." He's quiet for a minute before saying, "I don't feel like walking much." The way he said it scared the living shit out of me. I start screaming, not like a horse scream, but like an ear-piercing one. I knew the scream was strong and loud, and I'd even hurt my own ears, just hoping someone had their windows open somewhere off in the woods. But nothing happened. We struggled for what felt like minutes as he was trying to come at me. This entire time he was kind of laughing. He was drunk, so that was probably my only advantage, as I wasn't. He was sloppy and trying to attack me for whatever reason. I pushed on him like I'd never pushed on anything in my life. I pushed so hard that I felt my arms burning with pain. When he finally gets out of the car, I slam on the gas, not even bothering with the door. Remember, I was headed down a long-ass road in the middle of nowhere, and not on my road. It's a dead-end road after about 20 minutes, so I keep driving down this road I know well, knowing full well I need to stop and turn around, but this road is like 1.5 lanes wide, and there's hardly any turnouts. When I finally do, I turn around fast in someone's dirt driveway, afraid of the car being still even for a second. I take off driving, knowing I'll see him up ahead any minute. I never do. I never see him again. He was a local I'd known for years and saw frequently. I don't know if he took off to another area out of embarrassment or what, but I never saw him again. And I arrived home, shaking, red, scratched, out of breath. My boyfriend and our friend were at home playing Jenga, and I told them immediately, and they knew who it was too and went to try and find him. Never saw him again. This was last November. So, a few years ago I worked at a Waffle House in a college town, so weird people really aren't that unusual. To start off, there were only two 24/7 restaurants there, and I worked third shift at the Waffle House. Sometimes when a person's car would break down, the police would drop them off at one of these two places. They weren't supposed to, so they dropped them off within walking distance, but not actually outside, like some shitty loophole. So one night, I was working with a cook and another waitress. We'll call them Mark and Cassie, respectively. Around 11 p.m., this old guy wanders into the lobby with a little bag. First off, we don't usually get older people after around 8 or so, at the latest. Second off, dude's creepy as fuck. He starts off telling us about how his car broke down on the highway and the police dropped him off in the parking lot next door. I feel bad for him because it's the middle of the night, he's not from around here, and he has no money. So I pour him coffee and I don't charge him. My coworkers are usually on drugs, so I assume free coffee isn't going to get me fired. This is when the guy just starts talking my ear off. Like, I can barely get in a word edgewise, which is difficult since I'm usually the talker. He talks about what happened to him and then starts trying to sell all the tools he has in his little bag. Of course, we say no, but he just keeps asking about it. He also starts wandering in and out of the store. The first time he does so, Mark, who's ex-military, searches his bag to make sure he doesn't have any weapons because he's starting to raise some eyebrows. There's nothing but tools though, so we feel marginally safer. When he comes back in, I keep talking to him. Mark and Cassie nope the fuck away to the other side of the store and I watch. Keep in mind, this guy is literally the only person here. We don't start getting people until 1:30 when everyone leaves the bars. Now he's beginning to talk about a lot of weird things. I tell him I'm interested in studying prisons and he tells me the best way to do that is to get arrested. Then he starts talking about how he used to be in prison, but he never says why. He's starting to make us really nervous, so I start to draw him in case the dude decides to, murder us. We'll have something because I'm good at drawing things I can see. There's a low little wall where we usually write out customer receipts, so I can draw him without him noticing. Not that it matters, since he's looking straight ahead while he talks to me. We start getting customers because it's about 1 a.m. Bars let out at 1, so anyone who can drive gets there at 1, while those who walk there get there about 30 minutes later. And this guy keeps talking no matter where I am. He doesn't raise his voice or anything, he just keeps talking at the same level, even when I walk away to take care of other customers. At this point, I'm starting to think this guy is schizophrenic. I'm a psych major, so I mean the actual schizophrenia and not just crazy, and wanting to get away. But I really can't because I'm afraid he might do something. He does, but not what I was afraid of. He just starts insulting customers. He tells one kid that he's fat and asks why he's so fat and tells him he needs to lose weight. Then he talks to a family of travelers and says, "Your wife and kids are fine, but why are you so ugly?" We decide he has to go. Mark tells him he has to leave as we've warned him several times to leave the other customers alone. So Mark says if he doesn't scram, we're calling the cops. The guy starts yelling at us and glares at me a lot and asks why he should leave, but he finally does so. But he comes back half an hour later and we have to kick him out once again for insulting customers. He doesn't come back that night, so we decide he must have found a way home or contacted someone. So I finish around 7 a.m. and walk home. I live above the bars downtown, so it's a 30-minute walk, but along the way, I see the old guy. I dart behind a building and take the long way home. I don't think much of it because, hey, it's a small town and there's not a lot of places to go. I have to work again the next day, so I go home, sleep, and get all my chores done. I'm pretending to be an adult as usual. So about an hour before work, Waffle House calls me and my coworker Kevin tells me the old guy's been coming around several times during the day, every couple of hours, and looking for me. I'm a 23-year-old female, so they're worried about what exactly he wants. I call my friend Jason and tell him why I need a ride, and he brings me in. I ask what's been going on, and apparently this guy's been in at least 10 times asking to talk to me. He never says why, he just says he wants to talk. So I'm on edge, waiting because I have no idea what this guy wants. Is this 60-year-old guy pissed off I didn't defend him when he was kicked out? Is he asking for me just because I told him my name, or is there something else? Surprisingly, for the first few hours of my shift we don't see him, but he eventually comes in and ignores me. I'm super confused, but I keep an eye on him again. I've also bought pepper spray. Before long, though, we kick him out again for harassing customers. It's very confusing for me. He asks for me all day and then ignores me when he does come in. But after we kick him out, he doesn't come back. When my shift ends, my friend asks if I need a ride and I tell him no. The guy's left and hasn't come back, so I'm good. Well, that's what I thought, until I saw him walking towards me after work. He yells out for me and starts coming at me, but I run into another building I know has another entrance and exit. I sneak out another way before this guy can find me, and thanking every god I can think of, I know the town way better than him. I still have no idea what he wants, but I'm not taking any chances. I sneak home in some back ways and get there. I call work and let them know what happened and ask for the next few days off. They agree, and later tell me the old guy kept coming in the next few days, and they finally called the police on him and they took him away. So this is one of my less scary experiences with creepy or possibly deranged people in my life, but not to say it still doesn't creep me out. As a kid, I liked to sit on my little mini playground, as I called it, and read. I actually look back on this and laugh now that I'm a lot more isolated and an indoor person. Anyway, my dad got home around 6, so my mom took us to and from school. When my mom was there parking her car, she pointed out a creepy guy in a car in front of hers, just looking at us. She ushered us inside and brushed it up to just a weird coincidence or something like that. She still kept a close eye on me from the kitchen window, but she had to do something and left the kitchen. Now my mom was cautious because she had a creepy experience with a pedophile herself. From the top of the platform I was on, next to the slide, I heard a man say something. I don't remember what it was, but it was something along the lines of, "Hey kiddo, I have some Goosebumps books in my car, if you want to read them with me." My mom and dad had drilled stranger danger into my head, and I was a really smart kid for my age, So I tried to tell the guy off myself. I know, stupid decision, but I thought I could handle it. I was wrong. The guy kept insisting that I come and read with him, and I kept saying no. Eventually, the guy pretended to get a phone call and claimed it was from my mom. He told me she said to get into his car and he'll take me to the bookstore. I knew that there was no reason for her to ask someone to take me somewhere, and I just ignored him. Then he got out of his car and began approaching me. This was before we got a fence, so I was out in the open. He grabbed my arm and dragged me to his car, but just then, as if God himself gave me a miracle, a police car came down the road and saw what he was doing. The guy let me go and sped off. The officer chased him and eventually caught him. My mom came rushing out when she heard the sirens and comforted me. The guy claimed to be my dad and that my mom was abusing me. The officer knew my family well and called his bluff. I'm seriously glad that that officer was there just then. I can't explain it in any other way than it being a miracle. This might be a shorter story, but it is definitely scary and still gives me bad thoughts when I think about it. So, without further ado, let's begin. This took place after my parents had divorced, but they lived close to each other, so it wasn't all that bad. Anyway, I would frequently forget stuff at my mother's house and would take it up to my dad's house. This was almost a nightly thing. So one night, I was bringing my Xbox and some games to my dad's house, and one thing to note is that this was one of those double houses, if that makes any sense. Anyway, to get to my dad's house, I had to pass their side first. While I was passing their house, the wife, I presume, stopped me and asked me to come over. I thought that since my dad shared houses with her and her husband, that he knew and trusted her, so I came closer. She noticed the Xbox and games in my hands and straight up said, "Hey, we have a bunch of fun games and little boys your age that will play with you in here. You want to come in?" I slowly backed away, not turning my head to her as I was doing so. I felt a large, cold hand on my shoulder. My blood ran cold. I didn't dare turn around. I heard from behind me, "She isn't this nice all the time. I suggest you take her up on her offer." My fight or flight kicked in and I chose flight. His grip wasn't all that good, so I escaped easily and ran inside. I didn't tell my dad, but I did call the police. I couldn't live knowing that they might have multiple kids in there. A few minutes passed, and a police car showed up. 5 minutes later, the 2 officers walked out of the house with the 2 people. Apparently, they'd been luring kids into their house with the promise of games and toys. I still imagine what would have happened if the man's grip was stronger, and thank God I chose to call the police. They had 2 kids in the house, both boys. This is my story, and it's nice getting it off my chest. I'm a 28-year-old guy, currently working as a volunteer at a pet rescue shelter. I've been working like this for about 2 years, and I love this job. This happened about a year ago. It all began when a new girl started working at the shelter. I'll call this girl Gracie. Gracie was 21 years old and incredibly shy, or at least it seemed that way at first. During her first few weeks, she would only talk in one-worded sentences, no matter what she was asked about. No matter how often the rest of us tried getting her involved in social stuff, she would decline. A few weeks in, she started making comments like, "I just don't like people," and "I just prefer to be left alone." People obliged and left her alone. When she'd been working at the shelter for about half a month, she started following around a few guys like a lost puppy, drooling when she thought no one was watching her. I was one of those guys. Her behavior was outright creepy, as she was still not talking very much, just following people around, staring at them like a dog in heat. At one point, I went straight with her and told her that I found her behavior very creepy. I told her she should be careful because some might interpret her behavior as sexual harassment. She just looked away. Shit went down a few weeks later when I managed to stumble upon Gracie's Tumblr. Gracie had submitted a picture of herself standing with one of the pups from the shelter. She'd added a lot of hashtags about our local shelter, apparently in an attempt to spread awareness. Out of curiosity, I went to her actual Tumblr, and boy, it was just a Pandora's box of creepiness. Basically, Gracie's Tumblr could be split into 3 parts. One part was pictures of random people, most of which were people at work, and all of which were obviously snapped without the consent of the people in them. All of the pictures had stories attached about how the person in the picture was a bad person. Most of these stories were about how the person had been bullying Gracie, or making sexist or homophobic comments, and acting like a generally shitty person. All of these kind of stories ended with Gracie stepping in and telling the person to check their privilege, as if the stories weren't unbelievable enough on their own. The next part was pictures of guys Gracie thought to be hot, both real and fictional. And in between the pictures were stories about these people mixed in various relationships. Gracie even had made up stories about these 2 guys at work being in a relationship, and she had countless pictures of them doing stuff like talking or caring for an animal or whatever, with captions like, "See, they're totally in love. Gays are so cute." Mind you, both of these guys were in healthy relationships at the time. The last part was Gracie either reblogging or submitting texts about social justice, especially from the extremist parts of Tumblr. I found a post talking about how a guy at work had told her off just because she'd been looking in his direction. The conclusion to the post was, I don't see what his problem is anyway. Guys think about sex all the time. It's not like it's a violation when guys actually want sex. They can't get sexually harassed, because they would never actually object to sex. The post had been reblogged with various comments of, "Die, cis scum." At first I wasn't sure what to do about all of this. I knew something definitely had to be done about it, but I didn't know what. In the end, I went to my boss and we had a talk. She told me this was probably just Gracie living a fantasy on the net, but acknowledged it had to stop. The 3 of us had a talk, and Gracie was utterly humiliated someone had found her Tumblr. She didn't outright apologize, but she did seem to accept that it had to stop and understand that what she was doing was borderline illegal. In the next few weeks, Gracie became a shadow creeping around the shelter, somehow even more antisocial than she'd been before. My boss only kept her around because she was always free to do work at whatever odd hour was needed. Her Tumblr seemingly got deleted, but I had a creeping feeling this wasn't the end of it. About 2 weeks later, I was checking out the accounts that had been friends with Gracie's account. Mainly, I wanted to find out how far Gracie's lies and stories had spread. Mostly it was her social justice stuff and the gay stories about the guys at work people had been reblogging. Through all this, I found out Gracie had a new Tumblr, one that was even creepier than the old one. The new Tumblr didn't have a lot of posts, not at all like the first one, but those it did have were even creepier than her old ones used to be. One of these stories was an explanation about how she'd been forced to shut down her old Tumblr. Some lies about how it was because she was supporting the LGBT community, and her boss thinking ill of that, because some cis scum felt threatened. The next couple of posts were either updates on the gay couple and stories about them, or posts about this shitty dude at work. What made these posts really terrifying was that she made a threat about killing me. She even wrote long paragraphs about how she would like to strangle me, poison me, or stab me, and how great it would feel to kill off a cis scum such as I. What really made my heart jump was when I found a picture of my house. A few similar posts had been made about some of our coworkers, but apparently it was mainly me that she held a grudge towards. I went to my boss again, this time telling her I'd get the police involved too, because this sort of behavior was just way too far out. Gracie was called in again and got an earful, but during the entire talk it became obvious Gracie had no idea how her behavior was wrong. She told us it it was just stuff inside her head, that she would never actually do it, but when asked why she had then been uploading pictures of my home, and why she'd been stalking people and kept snapping pictures without them knowing, she just made up some bullshit about how it wasn't us on those pictures. I finally blew my fuse and told Gracie I'd talk to the police, because I sure as hell wasn't going to stand by as some creep was following me around with a camera. The police got involved, and as part of the case, they confiscated Gracie's phone, her camera. Apparently, this led to another case of drug possession, and Gracie was later taken to jail. I don't know what happened to her then, but I'm hoping she's in a place where she can no longer upload bullshit on her blog. Let me start this off by apologizing for any grammar mistakes. I don't have a good excuse, I just suck at my own freaking language sometimes. So, I turned 16 exactly 3 weeks ago, but I have this weird habit of rounding up my age months before my birthday, meaning I've been saying I'm 16 for a few months now. I like to spend a lot of my time at the local library. I'm homeschooled with 3 siblings, so it's pretty much the only chance I have to do my work in a quiet, neat place. About the beginning of this last summer, I noticed some guy was at the library every single time I was. At first, I thought nothing of it, as there's plenty of people I've noticed coming to the library regularly. But one day, I noticed something way off. I had finished all my schoolwork for the year and was just dicking around, playing some games on one of the library computers, when I noticed the same guy sitting 2 computers down from me. I smiled and nodded at him and then continued my game. The internet on my computer started going off, however, so I switched over to the other side of the computer desk and logged onto that one. Lo and behold, Creepy Guy, who I'll refer to as CG from here on out, switched over to the other side as well, sitting right next to me and staring at my computer screen as if I was blind and wouldn't notice. I immediately got a bad feel about this Scoob and texted my mom to tell her I'd be stopping by the pharmacy next door to pick up her prescriptions for her, just so I'd have an excuse to leave. Apparently, though, CG wasn't done yet and followed me outside. He stopped me right outside the library and asked me for my name and how old I was. I told him I'm Hamming and 16 years old. He informs me that his name is Jonathan, and he's 46. He then proceeds to tell me I'm one good-looking 16-year-old, and walks away. This dude looks about as stereotypical meth user as you can get. Scruffy beard, gel-spiked hair, dirty band t-shirt, and ripped-up cargo shorts, so I just figured he was your run-of-the-mill creep. The next day, I had a writers group meeting at the very same library, so I left my house and started walking for it. I'll spare you the tedious details, but around halfway through the walk I noticed CG following behind me on a bike. I was creeped out, but I didn't want to seem crazy, and I simply chalked it up to him walking the same way as me. To be sure, I ended up taking 2 right turns, both of which he followed. I was officially bugged out, so I turned onto our town's main road, which led straight to the library. He followed me the entire 3/4 of a mile there. At some point, I don't remember, I pulled out my phone and texted my girlfriend what was going on, and then called her until I got to the meeting. When I got to the meeting, I explained to the group leader what was going on, and she offered to drive me home afterwards. 2 hours later, and we leave and see CG still waiting outside the library, glaring at us all the way to the car. A few weeks went by without a CG encounter, so he was all but forgotten by me. Until the day he proposed to me. I was walking home from the grocery store with some snacks when I noticed him sitting outside the laundromat I pass on my way home. I groaned internally and decided ignoring him was the best bet, until he ran after me. I can't remember word for word the conversation, but it went something like, Hey, how old are you now? Still 16. I don't believe you. Now, I have no idea why I didn't just knock him out then and there, but I didn't, and instead I pulled out my student ID and showed it to him. What he said next, I'll probably never forget. "Oh, shit. Well, are you emancipated?" "No." "You should get emancipated." "Why?" "Because then you can marry me. I promise I'll take care of you, and our kids will be so cute." I booked it out of there, and after a couple more incidents of him following me around, he sort of dropped off the map, until back in August he cornered me in a gas station to demand to know why I act so scared around him, and to stop doing that. I haven't heard of or seen him since, but to this day, the idea of him still freaks me the fuck out. Obligatory, not me, but my girlfriend. Girlfriend's lease is up and is looking for a room to rent for the remainder of college, so being a student turns to Craigslist. She finds a great-looking house in a brilliant location, about 30 minutes from the university and a 2-minute walk from Main Street of a lovely little town. Rent's kinda cheap, too. The house is a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom place, and there's 2 guys living there. One was 24 and the other was 35 or close to it. Can't remember the exact age, and they both work together. Girlfriend goes for a visit and meets said guys. Thinks they're pretty decent, but the older one is a little odd. She decided to move in. All goes well for a couple months. She gets to know the guys better, and turns out the older guy's been homeless before and had a pretty rough start to life, but now he's firmly on his feet. She chalks his weirdness up to that. I come for a quick visit and meet these guys myself. Younger one is great, very talkative, and generally a nice guy. Older one is very quiet and keeps to his room a lot. I thought he was pretty weird too. I know you're waiting for a horror story, so here it comes. About a month or so after my visit, I get a phone call from my girlfriend who's in tears. She said that the police have raided their house with a warrant for child porn. The police have seized everybody's electronics, laptops, tablets, etc. Everyone in the house was like, what the fuck? Obviously, my girlfriend was absolutely terrified. She knew it wasn't her, and I think the police did too. She managed to get her stuff back pretty quickly after a few trips to the station. Me and her both guessed that it must have been older guy. Turns out, it was older guy. One day, he packed up a backpack of stuff and just left the house. Left his keys on the table, never to return. We suspect he was basically running away. He left all of his shit in his room. Remember, I said the guys work together? Younger guy told us a few days after that older guy had run off, that older guy went into his office and basically admitted it was him and that he'd been doing it for a while and that he's going to turn himself in. Naturally, he got fired on the spot. And obviously, he didn't turn himself in and has since vanished. I'm a blackjack dealer at a tribal casino in Oklahoma. I've been a dealer for 13 years. In that time, I've seen some scary people, but none stand out more than this guy. This was a freaky guy, and I'm not easily intimidated. He's about 6'2", medium build, dirty blonde hair, and a big scar on his cheek. Reeks of Bud Light and Winston cigarettes. He had a wife that always came in with him, and she always seemed to have fallen into something face first. He's a typical redneck asshole. Not only was he mean to his wife, he was hateful to everyone he encountered. One day, I was dealing to him and it wasn't going very well. I think I may have taken like $2,000 of his money, and that's when he started in on calling me things that, frankly, I wouldn't call my dog. When we encounter verbal abuse, we're allowed to have our pit boss have him removed from the tables. My pit boss is a woman, and he says, "I don't let no woman tell me what to do." As security is walking him off the tables, he looks me dead in the eyes and says, "You better watch your back," and I'll get my $2,000 from his ass one way or another. After the altercation, he was banned, but only for 30 days. Sure enough, after the 30 days, he's back in and on my next table. I ask my boss if I can avoid the table because of our past altercation. My boss tells me he'll keep an eye on him and I'll be fine. I get to the table and he just stares me down. I start dealing and he's winning. About 20 minutes into my 30 minutes on the table, he says, "Boy, am I glad you're paying me because I have a knife in my boot and I was planning on stabbing your ass." After my 30 minutes was up, I immediately notified my boss what was said. Security was notified. They take him to the back and sure enough, he has an 8-inch Bowie knife in his boot. This time, he was given a lifetime ban. This is less of a creepy one-person encounter, and more a whole community creeped out by one man. The neighbor in question is somewhat famous for his lawn, an impossibly thick green landscape that he had tended by a company. I've vaguely been aware of him losing it on the landscapers, screaming at them outside. Enough, I knew he had a temper anyway. The first real red flag that he might be legitimately crazy came last summer. He asked a teenage boy in the neighborhood to check in on the house once a day and make sure all the doors and windows were secured and water their flowers. The day they left, though, he left a crazy list, saying the kid had to be there multiple times a day, turning off and on different sets of lights at specific times, and leaving weird chores for him. Also, the kid wasn't allowed to walk on the lawn and had to remove his dirty shoes before walking on the concrete sidewalk. He was never to enter the house, but was to turn off and on the lights from the doorway by means of a stick with a loop on it. Also, he wasn't allowed to use a garden hose to water the lawn, but had to instead use a teeny tiny watering can. The letter implied that my neighbor would have the kid under surveillance and would have pictures if he failed to comply. Basically, the kid's parents called him and said they weren't comfortable with the situation anymore, and while they would keep an eye on the house, the deal was off. They argued over the phone. When my neighbor got back from vacation, it was early morning, and he immediately went to their house, woke them, and tried to pick a fight with them. One of the other neighbors is a retired cop and came out to see what was going on and tried to settle the issue. Crazy Neighbor said that he would let it rest if someone were allowed to bare-ass spank the kid. He flipped out when they told him hell no. Sometime after this, another neighbor was at the grocery store when he was cornered by Crazy Neighbor. Crazy Neighbor apparently just talked at him in rapid fire for a half hour. Among other things, he started saying how wives shouldn't have friends, and said that his wife's sister was so fat she broke the toilet seat last time she visited. After this, everyone started talking about how you don't see his wife anymore. Occasionally she'll be out watering flowers, but while her husband is seen out, she isn't. Considering that she used to be a social butterfly, this is weird. During the winter, everyone found pamphlets on their mailbox from the landscaper he uses, along with a note saying it was mandatory to now use this landscaper in our area, and failure to comply would result in being sued. We're private single-family homes with no homeowners association, so this is patently untrue. During the winter, someone saw his wife and her arm was in a sling and she had a black eye. When they went to ask her about it, he wouldn't let her speak, and she said that she had slid on ice. Since then, there have been a few attempts made to talk to her alone, and all have failed. They've gone so far as to get their church involved and to call a welfare check by the cops when he was out of house. But if she is being abused, she's been refusing help. Snow was bad this year, and he blew a fit about the snowplows piling snow on his property, so he scattered screws on the roadway outside before they came by one morning. And then, someone in the neighborhood got a puppy. It's quiet and has a fenced-in backyard. Its owners wake up in the middle of the night to hear the doorbell ringing, and when they come out, Crazy Neighbor is standing on the road at the edge of the property. He tells them that the first time the dog gets out, well, they won't have a dog anymore, and pulls out a gun and waves it around before pointing it towards the backyard and saying, Obviously, they go back inside and call the cops. When confronted, crazy neighbor claims he was out for a walk, thought they were awake, and stopped by. He says he didn't get the gun out, but it had been on his belt, and that he didn't mean his statement as a threat. He got some sort of citation from the police. Come spring, he's taken to sitting outside and writing something every time someone walks or drives by. We don't know what, but I've taken to driving differently home to avoid going past him. Most recently, someone put up a swing set in their backyard. They came back from work to find tire tracks through the backyard and the swing set run over and crushed. No one saw anything, but his massive truck happens to have the same kind of tires as the tread arcs left behind. The retired cop has taken to compiling statements from everyone and keeping records. Because, well, we think this is going to end badly. Saturday, I went out with friends and we stayed until the place closed at 2. I was driving down the rather twisty, wooded, dark and narrow road that leads to my development. I always take it slow along this road. My last car was totaled when I hit a deer along there. Once I hit a skunk, which I don't care to repeat. Near the ground along the road, I see a flash of light color, which I register as being an animal, like an opossum, so I lay on the brakes. My headlights frame what I now see to be a person, dressed all in black, and the white flash were reflectors on his sneakers. Then I recognize the guy as crazy neighbor. In a moment of stupid panic mode, I sort of give him a friendly, neighborly wave and smile. He's giving me the angry scowl of death. I drive on. It's 2 miles to my house, a bit further to his, and it's now close to 3 in the morning, and he was just lurking around in the rural woods. It sort of upset me as much as anything, because this was the alternative route I'd been taking to avoid driving by his house. Coincidence, but I still felt caught. I was telling this story this morning to a neighbor, and he tells me that multiple people have seen him out prowling at night, usually along the road, but he apparently set off someone's motion detector by walking through their backyard. Weirdest, once someone saw him in the wee hours driving a riding lawnmower down the street. Now, as far as I've seen, his landscape service mows his lawn, so it was weirdly just as much of a puzzler of why the hell does Stan have a lawnmower? Apparently, a few neighbors have gotten home security systems solely because of this guy. I'm going to install motion detection floodlights that will light up the whole backyard, just to try to scare him off if he ever comes on my property. I talked to the ex-cop neighbor and told him about the neighbor being out by the woods in black. You all talking about him hiding a body freaked me out. He's going to check into it. Update. Spoke again to the ex-cop neighbor, and apparently he took me seriously. He went out to check the woods in the area where I saw my neighbor with another cop. They found something. There was a camouflaged deer stand, with evidence nearby of a spot where a car had been parked, and probably several deer field-dressed. Considering it's posted land, this is poaching. My ex-cop neighbor thinks that either crazy neighbor is the poacher and I happened to catch him in the act, or that crazy neighbor, in his zeal to control the area, was trying to catch the poacher himself. I begged my ex-cop neighbor not to involve me if he confronts crazy neighbor about it, and he promised he wouldn't. One neighborhood family had a 4th of July party, Saturday the 5th. It was a low-key barbecue, and at some point, one of the kids there invited some other kids back to his place to play Wii. A bit later, crazy neighbor shows up at barbecue. He corners one of the moms and basically says he'll kill her kid if he's ever on his property again. Someone else overhears, and pretty soon the crazy neighbor is surrounded by understandably upset people who just heard a death threat against their kids. Apparently, crazy neighbor starts backtracking and saying he only meant for them to stay off his property and that he has a right to defend himself. When the crowd began getting angry, he ran off. Cops are called. According to the kids, they were walking by the crazy neighbor's house when a car came around the curb. There's no sidewalk, so they stood off to one side of the road, and then crazy neighbor came out yelling at them. The cop went to his house, and next thing someone sees crazy neighbor in the back of the cop car. Nothing happens around here Saturday night or Sunday, so neighbor isn't going anywhere until Monday at the earliest. No clue yet what the charges were. God, the whole neighborhood's in a buzz. Edit. Apparently, he'll be serving another weekend in jail and had a fine, plus has to take some sort of class. Also, there's some other charges from possibly non-neighborhood issues. Not sure if that was his interaction with the cops or what. Details are sketchy. The police blotter just said he was arrested after making threats and resisting arrest, so everything I'm hearing is word of mouth. When I was in high school, I had a part-time job at a video rental store. For reference, I'm a female. I was working one Saturday night and was behind the member registration desk, adding new member information into the computer. The desk was shaped like the letter L and was connected to the wall at the short end of the L. There was only one way in and out. It was near closing, and my manager was in the office counting down the tills, so I was alone out on the floor. A man had come into the store while I was working away at the computer. He had come straight to my desk and asked me for an application for membership. I said, "Sure," handed him one and politely said, "Here you go, sir." He paused for a brief moment, then thanked me. He walked over to the table that had been specifically built for new members to stand and fill out applications. He picked up one of the pens on a chain and started writing. I hadn't thought anything was off because he looked like the average middle-aged man, but that brief pause did seem a little too long. I brushed it off as me just being paranoid and went back to work. Everything was fine until I heard him speak. He had said something that I hadn't heard clearly, but the inflection of his tone suggested it was a question he had asked. I was about to ask him to repeat the question, but as I looked up and started to open my mouth, he started answering himself, in a different voice. I was taken aback by what I was seeing and hearing. He would lean to the left and say something in one voice, then lean to the right and respond in a higher-pitched voice. It was like watching a crazy, bad puppet show, with only one puppet. He started raising his voices, and I could clearly hear both of them talking about the information needed on the form. This conversation he was having with himself turned into an outright argument. At this point, I think it would be a grave understatement to say that I was a little alarmed. The truth was, it was a 4-alarm fire, and there was no fire hose in sight. I was getting seriously scared and decided it was time to get the hell out of there and go get my manager. I tried to quietly slip out from behind the desk, but this man had turned around and seen me. Before I could make it out from behind that fucking desk, he had stormed up to me, trapping me there. He stood in the one spot that kept me from getting help. He had an angry look on his face and stood there silent for what seemed like minutes, but was in actuality probably mere seconds. I was ready to piss myself. I was that scared. How I managed to hold my bladder will forever remain a mystery to me. He then leaned in towards me, putting his face near mine, and said, "If you tell anyone any of my personal information, I swear to God, I will come back here, find you, and kill you." All I could do was promise him that I would never tell anyone, and I kept repeating, "I promise." He then said, "Just remember, if anyone comes looking for me, I'll know it was you, and I will kill you." Those last 4 words were absolutely terrifying. He said each word deliberately, pausing for dramatic effect, as if the fucking psycho hadn't already made his point crystal clear. He then threw the membership application at me. It landed on the floor in front of me, and he stepped away from the desk. He walked to the exit, staring at me and pointing the whole time he was walking up the door. He then got into his car and sped off out of the parking lot. I was too frightened to move while he could still see me. I was afraid that if he saw me taking any kind of action, he would turn around and come right back. When the coast was clear, all I could think to do was pick up the application from the floor and get to the office so my manager could call the police and give them the details on the form. My heart sank as I ran to the office while looking at the paper. There was nothing on the paper. Well, except scribbles. Angry, black ink scribbles. We called the police anyway, but without anything other than the description of him, there wasn't much the police could do. It was dark out, and I couldn't see his license plate. I wish I had. When I got home from work that night, I thought about the mailman delivering mail to that psycho, or someone selling magazine subscriptions coming to his door, or a Girl Scout selling cookies ringing his doorbell. Would that crazy asshole think I sold him out? Would he come back for me? I quit that job the next day. My roommate and I lived in a 2-story condo during our last year of college. It was a new development with mostly college-aged neighbors, and in a good part of town. Over the course of the year, we had made friends with several of the tenants in the complex, so it wasn't surprising when somebody would knock on our door late in the evening wanting to have a drink or just hang out. Both of our bedrooms were upstairs, one overlooking the backyard and one overlooking the front door and parking space. My bedroom happened to be the one overlooking the front door. I was laying in bed well after midnight, cramming for the last exam I would take in my college career. I was halfway asleep when someone started knocking on the front door. I thought very little of it, as there was a girl that lived next door who my roommate would occasionally hook up with. I just assumed it was her trying to come over after a night of partying. And the knocking on the door soon sounded like someone lowering their shoulder and running into the door as if they were trying to break in. I went to the window overlooking the door and could see a person that was trying to knock in our front door. It clearly wasn't the girl from next door that I thought it might have been. This was a fairly large male, and he seemed intent on getting inside our place. He would take a few steps back, get a running start, and then hit our door as hard as he could. He wanted in. I left my bedroom and walked down the hallway to the other bedroom to wake up my roommate. Somehow, he wasn't awake from the noise. As soon as I opened his door, I heard our front window glass shatter downstairs. The guy that broke in then said, "All right, you motherfuckers," in a tone that told us the guy meant business. He sounded really pissed off. We locked the bedroom door and went through the bathroom that joined our 2 bedrooms and locked my bedroom door as well. Neither of us had a gun, just a couple of baseball bats if he did happen to make his way upstairs. We then called the police. We could hear him rummaging around downstairs, breaking some stuff and going through our belongings. And then he was silent. A few minutes later, several police cars pulled into the neighborhood and eventually into our place. An officer came upstairs to get us, and when we walked downstairs, there was the perpetrator, laying on our couch in just his underwear. He was high on some drugs and passed out once he saw the closest thing to a bed, I guess. Not sure why he chose our place, but his life may have been saved by the fact that nobody in the house had a gun. Not a sinister story by any means, but when he came busting through the glass and said, "All right, you motherfuckers," I thought we were done for. Newbie here. Reading these posts got me thinking of an experience I had about 6 years ago, when I was living with my boyfriend at the time in a very small backwoods town in West Virginia. It was 23 miles from the interstate to my house, and there was only one house close enough to be seen from our house. The majority of the traffic through our road was actually trucks carrying fracking wastewater. Yuck, I know. And it was extremely rare to see people out walking around in this area. As in, I had never seen it before. So, it was a peaceful place, but it could be pretty creepy all on its own. We lived in a single wide trailer next to my boyfriend's boss, his wife, and 3 kids,
the neighbor I mentioned previously. We were pretty close with them, and they were actually the reason we moved out to the area. We had spent a substantial amount of time out there before we moved out and had never really had any unsettling experiences. However, it didn't take long for that to change. We moved into our house as soon as the previous tenants moved out. My boyfriend's boss said that they were into partying, they constantly had people over, etc. We'd been living in a total shithole of a studio apartment, so we were really eager to start our new lives in a legitimate house. The first night we stayed there, I could have sworn I heard someone rummaging around on our back porch. There were a few things still out there from the previous tenants, but I wrote it off as my mind playing tricks on me in this new and remote location. However, strange noises continued to occur almost every single night. Rustling behind the house, thumps and thuds on the front porch, mostly things that could be definitely animals and not people. My boyfriend never seemed to hear them or just chose to actively ignore them, and he reaffirmed my original conclusion that it was all in my head. About a month after we moved in, I woke up to the sound of frantic pounding on my back door. The back door was just outside the door to our bedroom, so it was really loud. I laid there, half convinced I was dreaming for at least a full minute while the pounding continued. At that point I realized, no, I'm completely awake. What the actual fuck is going on? I shook my boyfriend, but he was an extremely deep sleeper, so he just kind of made some noises and rolled over. I tried to tell him there's someone on our back porch, but it was like he couldn't even hear it. This continued for probably about 5 minutes before it stopped abruptly. I was mortified at this point, physically shaking, and I'd been too scared to get up and go look myself. After about 10 minutes, I was convinced that whoever or whatever was out there must be gone, so I got up to look out the back window. Nothing. Front window. Nothing. No sign that anyone had been there. I was wide awake and figured I'd be up for the rest of the night, but being so far from everything with no internet, cable, or phone service, I got bored quickly and climbed back into bed and eventually drifted off. I told my boyfriend about it in the morning, and he agreed that it was pretty creepy, and that we should maybe get a camera or something in case it ever happens again. We both went about our days and went over to the neighbor's house to visit with the kids and have dinner. Before I even mentioned it to her, the wife of the family started telling me that her granddaughter had made her so mad the night before by suddenly remembering at midnight that she had a project due for school the next day that she hadn't started on, nor did she have the materials for. Fuming, she got herself dressed again and went out to head to Walmart to get some supplies to bail her daughter out of failing this project. As she started to get in her car, she saw someone walking along the road past her house. As she was already pissed off and generally has no filter anyway, she hollered out, "Can I help you with something?" And when he turned around to look at her, she said her heart sunk. She said he may have been some kind of tweaker or strung out on drugs or something, but his face was pale and his eyes were sunken in, and his appearance was generally disheveled and alarming. He looked back at her for a moment, and then turned around and continued walking without a word. She got in her car to head out the road to Walmart, thinking she'd pass him and get a better look at him on the way. As she rounded the bend just past our houses, she realized that he was gone. There's literally nothing between our houses and the next houses except woods for at least a mile, meaning he almost certainly disappeared into the woods. While we never saw him again or had any further disturbances, for the rest of our residency there, I couldn't shake the feeling that he must be watching us. I can still hear the pounding like it was yesterday. Was this guy living in the woods? Was he looking for someone who used to live there that he did drugs with? Did he need help? We'll never know. First thing I'm gonna say is that this is totally real, and I was freaked out of my wits for days. I don't think I could make some of this shit up. Everyone I tell it to says it's terrifying, and after reading through some of the stories on this subreddit, I think it would be a good fit. It was February of 2014, This thing I was doing at work kind of came to a head all at once, and I was basically going to have to spend the entire weekend writing a press release that was needed the following Monday by 10 a.m. Now, my grandparents owned some property way out in the boonies of East Texas. I grew up going out there all the time for family get-togethers and whatnot. Since it was only a 45-minute drive away from where I lived, I would go out there with friends to camp or party or whatever. Well, I knew I was going to be writing all weekend, and I thought, why not spend it in the great outdoors instead of holed up in my apartment in Houston? I had never stayed out there by myself, but had always been keen on the idea, and I thought this would be an excellent time to do it. I called my granddad asking if it would be okay for me to use the place for the weekend, and he said of course. He did seem a little reluctant about me doing it alone, but I was a 24-year-old guy who'd grown up hiking and felt totally competent to handle anything that might happen. Honestly, at the time I was a little insulted when he seemed to think me going out there by myself wasn't the best idea. He made sure I knew how to turn on the electricity and water, which of course I did. I'd only done it a million times when I brought friends. He asked if I had a key, which again, of course, I did. Finally, he said, "You know where I keep the Henry, right?" My granddad is kind of a cowboy and keeps a big 30-30 Henry repeater out there for mainly shooting white-tailed deer, but you never know. "Yeah," I said, admittedly for the first time nervous since, to my knowledge, he was the only one who had ever stayed out there by himself, and he'd never really talked to me about his guns. The drive out there was nice after I got out of the city. I left work at 4:30, already packed, and drove straight there. With traffic, fucking Houston, I made it out there by 6:45. Still light out, but it was beginning to turn to dusk. I took my duffel bag out of the trunk and went inside. The house is more like a small resort than a ranch house. It's really nice, which is why I enjoy taking people out there so much. My granddad was pretty well off and had the place built when he retired. It was 12 bedrooms, and I chose the upstairs sort of master bedroom, if you could call it that. I unpacked, sat on the bed, and opened my laptop to look at what I had to write, and immediately closed it. Fuck that, I thought. I'll work on that tomorrow. Now I want to take a walk. There's a trail that goes in a big circle around the perimeter of the property and is about 3.5 miles. It was dark out now, and the thought briefly crossed my mind to bring my granddad's gun, but I decided on a sturdy 5-foot wooden dowel instead, so I could have a good walking stick and I wouldn't slip in the dark or shoot my foot off or something. I put on a hoodie, grabbed a flashlight, and started off. It was a clear, moonless night, and the swath of the Milky Way across the sky was impressive, but it was still really dark out. I didn't use my flashlight, so my eyes would adjust, and after 10 or so minutes, I could see reasonably well. It was nice. Chilly, but nice. After about 1.5 miles, I decided to cut the route short through the woods and head back. I know the land so well that I could easily get back to the house from virtually any point on the property. The woods and brush were pretty dense, though, and I'm forced to turn on the flashlight. A thick wall of twigs and vines is revealed. I push through it with my stick, getting a couple scratches, when I see something deeper in the woods, partially obscured by the underbrush. It looks like someone left a pile of clothes in the woods. I keep the light trained on it for a second or two, trying to see what it is. Suddenly, it jumps up really fast and sprints away further into the forest. My heart is in my throat and my stomach does a somersault. I feel the pins and needles of an adrenaline surge all over. With all the force I can muster, I try to shout out, "Who is that?" But I have no idea what it actually sounded like. Immediately I regret not having that rifle, but hell, I even left my cell phone on the bed. Fucking brilliant. The worst part of it is, whoever that guy was took off in the direction of the house, and I can't remember if I locked the door. Now that the initial shock began to wear off, the real fear begins. It's suddenly very cold. Never before have I felt so isolated and so fucking stupid. I should have never come out here by myself. If that guy shoots me or anything like that, nobody will even miss me until Monday. Okay, get a hold of yourself. You need to get your phone.
I walk a mile through the woods, terrified. The woods end about 150 yards from the house's front patio, and I basically sprint it. Now, for any of you who've been in a situation like this, you know that running doesn't help. You feel that gut-wrenching panic getting a foothold and constantly think something is on your heels. When I get to the front door in this semi-sane state, I'm in for another shock, since the door is cracked open and I can't remember if I did it or not. I have to go inside. I push the door open holding the dowel sort of like a baseball bat and immediately hear shrieking coming from the living room. I don't think I've ever been as close to blind terror as I was at that moment. I wouldn't have been able to speak. A strangled escaped my throat, but I was hardly aware of it. I sprint up the stairs and into the room where my stuff is, at every turn expecting to see some horrific rotted corpse shrieking at me. I slam the door behind me and hear the scream again, from directly below me this time. I run into the bathroom and dial 911, locking the door and hiding in the shower. In retrospect, this seems like a really bitchy thing to do, but every ounce of bravado I had was long since drained. I tried to describe what was happening on the phone, but I'm not sure how much of it made sense. There's a little town about 9 miles away from our property, and that was where the nearest police station was. It took them 20 minutes to arrive, during which I heard the scream one more time. It was lower pitched now and sounded strangled. Then came the freaking godsend of flashing red and blue lights through the window. I was still in the shower when I heard a man shout, "Police! Anyone here? Come out!" I got up and opened the bathroom door and hear a voice downstairs. "Christ, Evans! Call an ambulance!" I opened the bathroom door and a cop down the hall has a gun on me saying, "Freeze!" I try to explain that this is my family's place and I'm the caller, but they still handcuff me. I soon see why. In the living room is the man I saw in the woods on his back staring blankly upward, one arm outstretched at the ceiling and the other bent but still reaching upward. His head was lying in a pool of blood. We eventually get it cleared up who was who and that I didn't crack that guy over the head. Later I found out that this guy was a paranoid schizophrenic and probably homeless man who'd wandered onto our property. Hard to tell where from. We still don't know why he was bleeding. Blunt force trauma or something. Maybe a fall. So insane, dude? You basically gave me like 3 heart attacks, so let's not meet again. And I'm pretty sure if it was my granddad instead of me out there, you would have gotten shot. I did, however, get the press release done by Monday. This incident happened to me in July of 2015. Just for clarification, I'm a 22-year-old female. 2014 was a rough year for me. I went through an awful breakup with my first boyfriend that sent me into a depression that I thought I'd never get out of. After a 2-week visit on a psychiatric ward in a hospital, I finally started to open my eyes to how great life could be. Started working out, made some new friends, and decided to get back into the dating game with the help of a funny little website called Plenty of Fish. I met a lot of weirdos on there, but also met some really decent people, so I can't say it was all that bad. I stated in my profile that I wasn't looking for anything in particular, but whatever happens, happens. A guy who lived about an hour away from me in a town where I grew up messaged me one day. We had mutual friends. A distant friend of mine dated his sister, who I met a few times, and she was cool. And after a few conversations on Plenty of Fish, we added each other on Facebook. Well, that summer, my best friend Katie, her boyfriend Lincoln, and I decided to drive out to a bar in that town because Lincoln's friend was playing a gig. We'd been there for an hour or two, and I was kind of buzzed. I was getting messaged by that guy from Plenty of Fish, Justin, and told him to swing by for a smoke and a chat. A few minutes later, Justin shows up and we hang out for a few minutes before he goes to the other side of the bar to play the slot machines. Note, the entire time he was there with us, he wasn't drinking at all and just had his face in the slot machine for like 2 hours straight. At one point, I asked Katie if we could go out to our car because I wanted a shot of vodka that I'd brought, just in case I ran out of money and didn't feel drunk enough. She agrees, and her and Lincoln and I make our way to the car. Lincoln ends up locking the keys in the car, and we're just there wondering if we should beat out the back window or find something to try to pry the door open with. Out comes Justin, We explained the situation to him, and he claims his house is down the road a bit and he has a coat hanger or something that could unlock the door. Katie and Lincoln agreed, and I offered to go with him, hoping to get to know him a little more on the way. Justin didn't seem drunk at all, and to this day, I'm not sure if he was, and just really good at acting sober. We get in the car and pull out of the parking lot. We were barely 15 seconds away from the bar when I see a police car parked at a convenience store across and up the street a little. The lights flicker on, and the car pulls out and starts coming after us right away. Justin's panicking. I don't know why. I tell him to just pull over and it'll be fine, but he had other plans. Being on a high-speed police chase. I don't know how fast he was going, but it felt like the speed of light. I remember telling him, "I don't want to die." He said, "Don't worry, my house is close, I got this." He was turning corners like crazy, each time slamming on his brake and spinning out 3 to 4 times before moving again. 2 or 3 police cars were right behind us with sirens and lights on, but he was determined to lose them. Next thing I know, we're in a ditch. Justin yells, "Run!" and exits his car, running straight into the woods. I get out, very luckily unharmed. Some police officers are waiting for me at the top of the ditch, telling me to put my hands up and whatnot. I'm scared as fuck. Never thought I'd be in a situation like this. An ambulance shows up. I tell them I'm fine and don't need treatment. I then sit in a cop car for 2 hours straight, talking to an officer who's recording my statement. I had no way to get a hold of Katie, who at first thinks I ditched her to hook up with this guy. The cops finally reach her, and she's freaking because they don't even tell whether or not I'm okay over the phone. So she thought I was dead or seriously injured until she saw me in the flesh. They ended up smashing their back window out with a rock and rushed to come see if I was okay. Katie and I ran towards each other and gave each other the most loving hug while crying in each other's arms. It was a scary night, but it could have been a lot worse. Here's the best part. I received a message from Justin on Facebook the next day. He apologized, kind of, and then proceeded to ask, "Round 2?" He's even had the nerve to ask me to hang out multiple times since. Justin, you put my life in severe danger, and we're never meeting again. Hello everyone. I want to thank every person on this subreddit for having the courage to share your experiences. Since I've begun reading here, I purchased an effective pepper spray. It's capable of spraying a person as far as 15 feet away, and it also marks the person with dye. I carry it in my purse within easy reach. Today, it worked almost like magic to keep me safe. I'm a female, of slight build, and am about 5'5" tall. I was leaving a hospital after visiting a friend who's a patient there. I was walking to my car, which was parked in one of their parking lots. This hospital is located in a bad part of town. I try to avoid this area because of its high crime and seedy reputation, but I love my friend and had to visit. As I walked towards my car, a tall, bulky guy was walking in front of me. He was about 6 feet in height and had a stocky build. At first, he seemed normal and non-threatening in any way. Then everything changed. He began to ramble loudly and began gesturing with his hands. I thought that perhaps he was high on drugs and that was making him act in this manner. I decided to leave the sidewalk we were both walking on and walk in a different direction. I just wanted to get away from this creepy guy. As soon as I did this, he turned from the direction he was walking and began to make his way toward me. As he did so, he locked eyes with me and began making animalistic sounds. His entire demeanor made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. At this point, I had my pepper spray in hand and moved the lever on it to the ready-to-use position. He was coming toward me so fast that I had to go further out into the parking lot area. I was hoping to lead him out far enough in order to buy enough time and space between us in order to run back and jump into the safety of my car. He seemed to sense what I was doing, and I began to feel as if we were in a cat-and-mouse situation. This is when everything changed. I put up my hand to aim the pepper spray and was about to yell out, "I have pepper spray and I will use it!" Before I could speak, the creepy guy saw the pepper spray in my hand and immediately did an about-face and walked away quickly from me. A funny thing I realized after this encounter was that when he saw the spray, he got quiet. He
He was no longer acting animalistic or loud in any manner. He went from creepy to normal in 2 seconds flat. It made all the difference in the world to have that in my hand, ready to aim and spray. I never even had to utter a word to him. I quickly got into my car and locked the door. I breathed a sigh of great relief as I started my car. This guy was coming toward me in a frightening and menacing manner, but the mere sight of the pepper spray made him change his mind about accosting me. Thank you, both Reddit and Redditors. If it weren't for your shared experiences, I wouldn't have been prepared to defend myself today. Long-time lurker, first-time posting. I hate the fact that I have a story to even post to this subreddit, but it goes to show you, when living in a major metropolitan city, you never know what walks of life you'll pass by, or drop off. Little backstory. In 2003, I was a 16-year-old employee at an urban clothing store here on the south side of Chicago. At the time, I had a manager who was in his early 20s by the name of Anthony. Anthony was pretty arrogant and obnoxious, but overall he was a pretty cool guy. I used to kind of give him shit and tease him when it came to approaching the ladies, because he always seemed timid or too aggressive. I was, and still am, a ladies' man, so yeah, I was being an asshole. After working at this place for about 3 months, Anthony asks me if I would drop him off at home. It wasn't far from the direction I was heading in, so I dropped him off maybe twice a week for the next month or so. Now let me tell you, these car rides were quite uncomfortable. This guy, as much as we spoke at work, would not speak and sort of just kept looking straight. It got to the point that his awkwardness went from entertaining to straight creepy. Fast forward 3 or 4 years later, I'm watching the news as they go into detail of a horrific crime committed by a Comcast installation worker. Apparently, the Comcast worker entered 2 homes he was due for an installation, raped, beat, and strangled 2 women. The real unfortunate thing is this happened on 2 different occasions, and after the first murder, the gentleman was arrested and questioned, but released and sent back to work, which allowed him to strike again. As the picture of his mugshot flashed the screen, I froze. It was Anthony. Now, growing up on the south side of Chicago, I've grown up and befriended a fair share of people who grew up to be murderers, but this took the cake. So, Anthony Triplet, let's not meet, because that would mean I'd be in jail with you. This story is technically my mom's, but it's somewhat affected my siblings and me as well. My mom grew up in South Florida, and this started during the early 70s. She was a senior in high school, and she met a guy at a wedding. He was the drummer in the wedding band, a few years older than her, and therefore he was the cool, mysterious guy that many girls her age dreamed of. They immediately hit it off, and he commented on her saddle shoes she was wearing at the time. She gave him her home phone number, and I believe they maybe went on 1 or 2 dates, and everything seemed totally fine. He would regularly call the house, and she would sit on the kitchen floor and talk to him. One night, their phone conversation took a weird turn. He started asking her things like, "Have you ever thought about killing yourself?" and "Do you ever think about murdering people?" Obviously, she was shocked at this and got very uncomfortable and completely stopped talking to him. This is the last she heard from him, or so she thought. It was 2012, and I had just graduated from college. I was hanging out in my college town to finish out my lease and work and figure out my next move. My mom calls me and says something weird has been going on. She tells me she's received a letter from this man she knew in high school. I had no idea about the guy, as she'd never mentioned him at all to me, my siblings, or my dad. She explains to me who this man is and how she knew him, but hadn't spoken to him since that one uncomfortable phone call. The letter said something like, "I see you're really happy and married with kids, etc." But he goes on to mention each of us by name. He also mentions my dad's name and where he works. My parents met in college in another state. They quickly married, graduated college, and moved to yet another state, and then another state once my 2 sisters were born. She had no idea how he knew her new married name and address. She's never been on social media, and once she had all of us kids, had stopped working. If you were to Google her name, you wouldn't find a thing. She then recalls getting a phone call from the Alumni Association at her college, telling her that a man had been calling on and off for months trying to get her contact information, but they weren't allowed to give out that information. She then tells me his name, and I remember having a Facebook friend request and a Twitter follow request from this man. My siblings all had them as well. My mother, having no social media like I mentioned, asked me to see if I could dig around his social media accounts and see what I could find. I find a music MySpace and a Reverb Nation page of some really terrible music he'd recorded and uploaded. One of the songs was called Victoria, which is her name. All the other songs had seemingly normal titles like Summer's Day, etc. I tell my mom this and she freaks out. I send her the link and it's hard to make out the lyrics because the quality is so bad. But he mentions her saddle shoes, her beauty, etc. They literally hung out twice, 40 years ago, and these were songs that had been recorded pretty recently. I dig a little deeper and find out that he's made a website dedicated to freeing Amanda Knox, the woman accused of murdering her roommate in Italy. This was super alarming at the time, but I've since not put too much weight on that since her innocence is actually very possible, but it's still very strange. My dad didn't seem fazed by any of this, but my mom was freaked out and wouldn't stay home alone since this man knows their address. She ends up telling all this to a family friend who's a private investigator, and he decides to do some digging on this guy. First of all, he's changed his name. Secondly, he's moved to about 5 different states in the last 20 years under different aliases and working completely different jobs. There wasn't much that could be done since he never actually threatened my mom and he somehow didn't have a record. He still pops up every now and then with friend requests to my siblings and me, but other than that, no one knows what his deal is. The fact that he's moved around quite a lot and changed his name is definitely a red flag. I personally think this dude is a serial killer. If he's not, then he's just a sad, lonely, mentally unstable man, and I hope he gets the help he needs. Props if you stuck through this whole thing. I know it's not as creepy as most of the other stories on this sub, but I'm lucky enough that this is the only one I've got. This is kinda long, so yeah. This happened around 3 years ago when I was away on a school trip. This trip was for younger students. A few people from my year in school had been asked to go help look after the younger children. To give perspective, I was 14 when this happened. I was about 5'2", female, and probably weighed less than 100 pounds. One particular day, the children were doing an orienteering activity in the woods, basically using a compass to follow a trail to find your way to the end of it. It was the 3rd day into the trip, and by this time a group of 4 boys, who I now know all had severe behavioral problems, had taken a liking to me for whatever reason. Therefore, when the children got asked who they wanted to chaperone for their activity, they chose me. We started the activity, and for the first 10 minutes, the group of boys seemed to be doing what they were supposed to, and I could see other groups from my school in front of and behind us, so I thought everything was going fine. The woods that we were doing this activity in were huge. I had no experience using a compass, and neither did the boys in the group. The boys I was looking after quickly became disinterested with the activity and started to run in random directions, climb the trees, etc. After about 40 minutes of chasing these boys in random directions through the woods that I'd never been in before, I realized we were completely lost and expected to be at the finish line soon. I began to panic as I was only 14 and had been put in charge of younger children, therefore I knew I'd be held responsible for us getting lost. I ended up being able to scare the boys enough to make them focus and help me find a proper path, as by now we were walking through bushes and trees and completely off any type of path. This is where it gets creepy. After walking down this path for 10 minutes, I see a clearing in the trees up ahead. I couldn't see what was in this clearing, so hoping it was an exit from the woods, I started jogging up to it, followed by the boys. As I turned the corner and got a better look at the clearing, I stopped dead in my tracks. It's hard to explain how I felt when I first saw this man. And all I can say is, I've never felt so much danger in my life before this. My whole body was completely glued to the spot, and I could feel the color drain from my face. In the clearing, there was a man sat on a bench. He looked to be around his mid to late 40s, slightly overweight, and looked homeless. He was balding, however the hair he had looked damp, like it was that greasy. His eyes looked glazed over and his mouth sort of hung open. That's when I realized on closer inspection that he had red stains all over his mouth. It's hard to describe this man, but the vibe I got from him was just evil. Think of a fat Trevor from GTA 5. At this point, my fight-or-flight instincts kicked in. I spun around to see the boys behind me who had completely blocked out. They all looked absolutely terrified as they'd stood behind me, looking at this man too. I shouted "run" to the boys and sprinted past them as fast as I could. I can honestly say I've never run so fast in my life. I could hear the boys running behind me and they were literally screaming bloody murder. I didn't even look back for a second, to be completely honest. I was only thinking about myself at that moment, and I was getting the fuck out of there, and fast. I knew the man was chasing behind us because the boys were screaming that he was coming, and he was behind us. I don't know how the boys were shouting so much. All I could think of was my imminent death. Fortunately, the creeper was overweight and couldn't keep up with 5 teenagers who just got the biggest adrenaline rush of their lives. I'll never know what would have happened if we didn't run or if the man caught up with us, and I can honestly say I'm glad. We came across 2 elderly women walking their dogs about half an hour after the incident and managed to hitchhike a lift back to the camping grounds.
Hey everyone. I was just lurking through Let's Not Meet and saw a story that reminded me of something that happened to me when I was about 12 or 13. I'm 18 now, and I thought, what the hell, I'd share. So at 12 or 13, all my friends were getting into makeup and clothing, etc., and were constantly buying nice designer stuff. My family was broke at that time, so I was never able to afford to get any. This led me and my best friend Emily to go looking for ways to make money. Where I live, you can't get jobs at 12 or 13, so we were thinking of doing jobs for our neighbors like dog walking or car washing. Emily came up with the idea of doing modeling for money. She said you can put pictures of yourself online and photographers will get in touch with you and you could potentially make money. So, being stupid, we went on loads of modeling websites, most of which probably weren't legit, and started putting my picture everywhere. We also put my phone number on there so people could contact me. Anyway, nothing really came of this, but the next weekend I was back around Emily's house and my phone rang. It was an unknown number, and I answered. From what I could tell at the time, it was an older man. He started off by saying he'd seen my picture online and complimented me, saying I was very pretty. He then went on to explain he could have a potential job for me, so I asked him what he would want me to do. He said he would like me to come to an office in the city and read a script, but the script was quite mature, and he wasn't sure if I was old enough. I told him I was 13, and this is where it got weird. He started asking questions about my body, like if I had pubic hair, if my breasts had come in yet, and how big they were, and even asked me to shave my legs yet, or if I hadn't grown hair there yet. At the time, I was stupid and young and didn't realize these questions were fucked up. So I actually answered him. He also explained all about the script he wanted me to read. This was basically him describing people having an orgy, and I was supposed to read a script about the orgy? As we continued to speak, his breathing got louder, and he sounded as if he was doing something he shouldn't be. Then he asked if I was home alone. We were, but instead I said no and that my friend's mother was home. He replied by saying, "Well, why is her little purple car gone then?" This freaked me out and I hung up. My friend's mom did have a small purple car at the time. I have no idea how we would have known that. Maybe it was someone we knew? I'm not sure, but anyway, after that I went back online and took all my pictures down from the modeling sites. As a disclaimer, although I've been in the States for a while, English is not my first language, so I do apologize for any transgressions against the English language. This is also a throwaway account. Alright, so this occurred roughly around 2 years ago, August of 2014. My husband, whose nickname is Skeeter, and I had just moved down to a small town in Nevada from the bustling city of Los Angeles, California. For safety and practicality purposes, I won't disclose the exact location of our residence, but I will say this area's population is definitely below 900 people. We'd moved just shortly after the birth of our son, having decided that the small town life was for us, as a young couple and young parents. Jobs are easier to come by, the pace is slower, expenses are reduced, and it would be the perfect place to raise our family. Surprisingly, the only concern I'd had about the place was the fact that everything was so spaced out, with the nearest house being over like a mile away. In case of an emergency, my neighbors could be of little to no assistance. Skeeter, however, had no qualms about this, as he was a rather private person and the idea of slight seclusion didn't particularly bother him. In we moved on a hot summer day. Now, in this incident, we had only been in town for maybe 2 weeks, and we were still settling in. It was a warm Friday night somewhere around 11 o'clock p.m., and my husband was in the town working security at the bank. Our son Julius was only 3 weeks old and very colicky, and this night he was just inconsolable. No matter what I did, he wailed his little lungs out. I was stumped for what to do, so I decided to go for a walk with him, as car rides always seemed to soothe him. I would have driven the baby around in the car, but Skeeter drove himself to work that night. I should mention we have 2 dogs, a 2-year-old German Shepherd named Titus, and our 4-year-old Maltese, Dasha. I figured they would need a walk before I managed to calm Julius down, and we all turned in for the night. One thing about Dasha and Titus are that they're overprotective of me and the baby and will raise the alarm at the smallest of threats. It made me feel safe walking alone outside in the pitch dark with a newborn, miles away from any other human beings and the security of my husband. So, I threw on their leashes and strapped the bawling Julius to my chest, heading out the back door and making sure my keys and phone were in my pocket. There's a winding, unpaved trail that starts a few feet to the left of our back porch and leads into a thatch of tall trees. It's about a 10-minute walk down, but I wasn't afraid, due to the fact that I'd grown up taking hikes in the Topanga Canyon and going on camping trips in Big Bear as a child. The walking seemed to do the trick, as within a few minutes the baby quieted down and my dogs finally relaxed. They were always tense when Julius was fussing. I was just about to pass the wild shrubbery and tall grass that you see right before you get to the firs when I felt resistance on the other end of the leads. I glanced back, and Dasha and Titus were paused and looking off to the right of the path at full attention. As a mother and a female, this of course made me very paranoid, and I gently tried to coax them to keep walking. Both took a few steps, but Dasha stopped again and I could see her fur standing on end. Titus began to growl, which freaked me out because he was the more docile of the two, and I'd rarely ever heard him growl. This time, I hissed my command, and they hesitantly moved forward. At this point, I was beyond petrified, as I had no idea what the hell was out there and causing my dogs to go crazy. Even if I did, what could I do with a baby, 2 dogs, and no protection? I decided to turn around and go back home. Forget this whole situation. Right? Wrong. We'd been heading southwest, back in the opposite direction that we'd come from about 2 minutes when a figure stepped onto the weathered path. Literally, there are no words to describe the icy, potent fear running through my veins at the small figure just a few feet in front of me. I'm about 5'2", and this person, or whatever the hell it was, is several inches shorter than me, maybe about the height of an average 10-year-old. The creepiest part is that this thing had a pig mask with the mouth crudely carved in a crooked smile and smears of dark liquid all over their face. I don't think it was blood, but I digress. We're just standing there staring at each other for what has to be 30 seconds, when all of a sudden, Dasha and Titus launched themselves at Pigman, snarling and snapping at him aggressively. It was almost rabid, and it should have scared a normal person, but it didn't scare him. Pigman looks down at my dogs in an almost curious fashion, and I'm thanking God that the leashes are keeping them from seriously wounding this individual. I'm also trying to think of how to get myself out of this situation without freaking out. To my surprise and happiness, the baby hadn't gotten scared and started crying from all the ruckus and was just cooing softly.
Pigman finally seemed to notice the baby on my chest, and I guess it had some type of morals. It made a weird sort of wailing sound and darted back the way it had come, and I could hear it disturbing the grass as it walked further into the wild greenery. I didn't wait to see nothing else, and noped the fuck out of there, hauling ass all the way home. It's true what they say about adrenaline. It makes you do some amazing things. Here I am, still recovering from childbirth, with a baby strapped to my chest and 2 dogs, and I'm full-on sprinting in the almost pitch darkness. I'm surprised that I didn't trip or hurt myself. The usual 10-minute walk only took about 3, and when I got home I double-locked the doors, closed all the windows and curtains, and waited for my husband to get home. Titus and Dasha are troopers, my little saviors, and I thank God for them protecting my family. I would have never known that thing was there until it was too late had it not been for them. I don't know how things would have turned out if I hadn't brought them along. They got extra love and treats for months after that, and to this day I never go outside alone at night. I don't know who or what the hell that pig-masked fucker was, but I'm just glad I got my baby, my dogs, and myself away from it. One summer night in 2013, I headed over to my friend's house to hang out with her and her roommate. We had a lot of fun and time flew by. It was already 1 a.m. and it was time for me to go home. My friend offered to let me stay the night, but I refused as I hate staying in other people's homes. I'm just not comfortable. Then her roommate suggested I'd take the bus since it was coming soon. Once again, I refused and told her I was going to walk, since it's night out and I love walking, especially while listening to music. My friend lives in a sketchy area, and a lot of drug dealers and creepy people live there. Also, I'd like to add I was a teenager but looked much younger, and still do. I was always mistaken for a 12 or 14-year-old. I began my 30-minute walk listening to music. About 20 minutes into my walk, I noticed a white van driving the opposite way I was going. Being late at night and walking alone, I instantly thought of the typical cliché van stories. I chuckled and told myself to stop being so paranoid. As I continued walking and the van got closer, I thought to myself, what if the van stops? What if there are really some crazy people inside that van? Being the paranoid person I am, I stopped my music while continuing to walk and dialed 911 on my phone, but didn't press the call button, just in case. To my horror, the van slowed down and pulled over really close to me, still facing the opposite way. My heart started beating fast. Is this really happening right now? What the fuck do I do? I just stood there, frozen, and looking at the van to see their next move. The driver's window rolled down. "Jenny?" A woman in her late 40s to mid-50s asked. "No, I'm not Jenny," I said. I felt a little bit of relief when I realized it's just a woman looking for someone. "Jenny, is that you?" she asked again. Once again, I told her that I was not Jenny, and I slowly began to walk again while still keeping my eyes locked on her. There's no way she didn't hear me, as she was very close to me. The door opened and the lady stepped out. "Jenny, is that you?" she said while slowly walking towards me in an almost crouched position. I stopped walking and just stared at her. At this moment, I'm totally freaked out and my fight or flight reaction kicks in. "I am not Jenny," I shouted, a bit annoyed. My voice giving the indication that I'm scared, I quickly glanced over to the van and then in the passenger seat. I saw a scruffy-looking male just staring at me with a blank face. Okay, I need to get the fuck out of here, I thought to myself. As the woman got closer, she glanced at my phone. I think she saw 911 on my keypad, and she backed up a bit and said she'd mistaken me for someone else. Still a little bit spooked, I nodded and began walking again, still keeping my eyes on her. I watched her get back into her van. She rolled the window down again and asked if I knew directions to some street that I never heard of. I'm very familiar with my city, and that street either didn't exist or it's somewhere normal people don't go. I guess she was trying to convince me that she was really looking for someone. Yeah, right. I lied and told her I'm not from the area and walked away faster. The van then sped off in the opposite way I was going, and as I turned the corner to get onto the main street, which was completely empty at this hour, I started bolting down it. There was a convenience store nearby and I was heading towards it. I have the habit to look behind me since I'm so paranoid, and as I turned my head to look back while I was still running, I saw the white van behind me. They saw me running and I guess they realized that I was onto them if they had any ill intentions. I ran into the store and the van didn't pull into the parking lot, but instead it passed me by and stopped at a stoplight. Then I watched it disappear into the distance for good. To this day I don't know whether or not they had ill intentions or if they were just looking for someone. Maybe they really were lost. But if they were, why'd they make a U-turn and come back my way? I myself think that the lady thought I wasn't worth the trouble since I wasn't as naive as they thought. I must say, I'm thankful that I'm so paranoid. It might have saved my life, because God only knows what kind of intentions they had. I live in a semi-rural area. It isn't too sparsely populated, but there are some pretty long stretches of road where there's nothing but corn for about a 10-minute walk or more. The road I live on in particular runs through some farmland and then down into a forest with a few houses here and there. Before I moved away to college, I would often take long walks from one end of the road to the other. It was about an hour's walk, but it was good if you needed to clear your mind and get some exercise. Anyway, 2 years or so ago, I was taking my daily walk and I was in the middle of an abandoned stretch of property. A car pulled up beside me and the driver rolled down his window. He looked to be in about his 50s, and the car looked pretty old and dirty as well. He called out to me that his phone had died in the middle of his drive and he needed to call a friend to ask him something. He asked if he could use mine. I remember his voice sounding strangely confident for a man addressing a stranger in the middle of nowhere. I pulled out my phone, but then realized he could be trying to steal it. After all, if I gave it to him, there'd be nothing stopping him from speeding off and leaving me without a phone to call the police. I told him I was fine where I was, and that if he told me his friend's phone number, I would call him myself and relay a message. The driver said all right, and held a piece of paper up to his window, telling me that his friend's phone number was written there. Looking closely from far away, I realized there was nothing written on the paper. He was just trying to get me closer to his car. A sense of dread came over me. I looked left and right, then told him no and walked quickly in the opposite direction. When I looked back, the man was glaring at me from out his window with the strangest expression I've ever seen. Almost a glare, but too cold and unemotional. Then, he rolled up his window and drove away. I walked quickly back to my house and stayed there for the rest of the day. I don't know if that man was trying to rob or kidnap me, but I'm glad I didn't approach the car. Lurker here. I don't post or comment too often, but I thought of something that happened to my mom back when she was 19 or 20. My mom was born in the late 50s in Detroit, so keep in mind she came from a safer time, where it was more socially acceptable to play in the streets at night, talk to strangers, and not have to worry. Anyways, winters in Michigan are rough. There's snow and sleet everywhere, and you really couldn't go anywhere without a bundle-fuck of clothing on. She was coming out of a local grocery and this little old lady came up to her with her face almost completely covered. The woman explained that she needed a car ride to her house. My mom was reluctant at first and questioned why she didn't have family or money for a phone call to pick her up. Odd. But she told me she used to pick up hitchhikers a lot, so she figured this frail old lady shouldn't be out in the cold by herself. My mom started putting groceries in the trunk and said it was okay to get in the car. The woman got in the back seat. My mom just figured she was probably more comfortable in the back, so she didn't question it. She puts the car in drive and they go on their merry way. The woman explains that her house was just a few blocks away. When my mom began to wonder how much farther it was, the woman just said softly, "Just another block or two." This is where shit hits the fan. My mom comes up to a red light at a busy inner-city intersection. At this point, she gets a weird feeling, but nothing too alarming. As my mom is looking around from behind the wheel, she looks in her rearview mirror, throws her car in park, and shoves open her door. That wasn't a little old lady in the back seat. It was clear as day a man that tried luring her to his house, or God knows where. She's right in the middle of the intersection, She gets out of the car and opens the backseat door. She, in her words, told the man to get the fuck out of my car right now. He got up, looked at her, and walked away into the street. My mom never picked up anyone, ever again. This happened when I was in kindergarten, so I was about 5 or 6. My mom had recently welcomed home her second baby, and he wasn't born in the best condition. This isn't important until later. Anyways, my school district had an early release day for us. However, my mom must have not seen it on the school calendar because she wasn't waiting outside for me. My old apartment building was the kind of building where you either needed a key or to be buzzed in by a tenant. Because I was 6, I didn't have my own key, so I rang the bell. However, my mom didn't buzz me in, as she didn't know I was to be let out early. With no choice but to wait outside, I sat down on the steps and waited for my mother. It seemed only a few minutes had passed before a man walked up to the steps with a key in his hand. Assuming he was one of the other residents, I quickly explained my situation to him and asked if he would let me inside. The man obliged to let me in, but told me to stick with him for safety. Naturally, this made sense to me, so I agreed. I reckoned he wanted to stop at his apartment for a moment, and then he would walk me to where I lived. He opened the door and stepped into the building. He grabbed my wrist and pulled me in behind him. It dawned on me that it was a rather small apartment building, and my mom knew almost all the tenants. I didn't recognize the man as one of them, but I figured he must have moved in recently. I found it weird that he grabbed my wrist, but when I tried to pull away, he only held it tighter. Once we got inside, he quickly began walking down the hallway towards the back door. At this point, I knew something was wrong, but being 6 years old, I couldn't do anything but help my cause. For what happened next, I'm forever grateful. My mom's friend, we'll call her Michelle, was on her way to the back door, because that's where the parking lot was. Upon seeing the man trying to take me out the back, she screamed at him, demanding to know who he was and what he thought he was doing with me. The man quickly let go and ran out the back. Michelle took me back to her apartment and let me wait there until my mom got home. I asked Michelle about this recently, and she told me that the man hadn't been a resident in the building. So, creepy man who tried to take off with me, you can go fuck yourself.
Before I start my story, I'd like to point out that I may have some grammar and spelling mistakes along the way. English is my first language, but I'm really nervous about my first Reddit post. Bear in mind that I'm not a writer. I just want to get this off my chest, and I know you guys love a creepy experience. I'll also be using fake names, not locations, for obvious reasons. Story time. Now, I'd like to start by addressing the elephant in the room. I'm a 19-year-old girl, fully capable of making decisions on her own, and this particular event was my fault entirely. This'll be important down the line. You'll understand soon enough. My parents have always been strict, mainly because of my father's shady connections, and them not wanting their only daughter to get into trouble. So it really doesn't come off as a surprise when I tell people my first ever actual road trip happened on my 19th birthday. Me and a few friends of mine drove down to Arizona and spent a few nights camping. We're from Oklahoma. We met another group there, and we all decided it'd be for the best if we stick together and do what our generation does these days. Because we didn't have much time, both groups decided it's for the best if each and every one of us shares something they wouldn't otherwise, and after one too many drinks, it was finally my turn. Despite being reluctant at first, peer pressure did its thing, and I opened up about possibly my only fetish: blowing a guy through a glory hole. A million jokes later, a girl, which I'll call Marie from the other group, told me that if I was interested in actually living out my fantasy, I should go to a certain pub in Dallas. I can't share the name of it for obvious reasons. And seeing as I'm from Oklahoma, she thought it'd be in my best interest to know about it. Fast forward to a few days later. Here I am back at my place thinking about taking a short trip to Dallas, and I think to myself, Anne, you're 19. You had your first road trip. Just go for it. And go for it I did. I packed a small backpack for a few days, bought a bus ticket, and I was on my way to Dallas, to a certain pub at which, according to Mary, I'll live out at least one of my fantasies. I won't lie, I had butterflies in my stomach from the moment I took the first step outside my place, all the way to the actual pub at which I was supposed to go. The bar looked, well, old to say the least. It wasn't the best looking place nor the cleanest, to be frank, but that was the last thing on my mind. Not surprisingly at all, most of the people inside were men around their 30s, with an alarmingly low number of women, not counting the 2 waitresses working the tables. That was the first red flag, but as I said before, I really wasn't paying much attention back then, now that I think about it. I sat by the bar, had a chat with the bartender, who was a really nice person, and after 2 drinks, I decided to take a leap of faith and actually do it. I'm not going to pretend nor lie. I was looking forward to it, and was quite excited about the whole thing. As instructed by Mary beforehand, who kept in contact with me, I entered not the ladies' room nor the men's restroom, but the room between the 2. Thinking back to this, thank God I locked the door as soon as I entered. It was small and it had one stall facing the men's restroom, which made me chuckle because I really had no idea what to expect, and next to the stall there was a small sink, which I imagine it's pretty self-explanatory as well. I skipped like a little girl to the stall, opened it, and waited very nervously. A few minutes passed before I heard the man's restroom door open. The man, almost as if he knew me without even doing anything, stepped inside the stall facing mine and stood in front of the hole, doing literally nothing. I wanted to get closer and look, but something was off. It felt very wrong. All I could see from a slight distance were his black pants and his hands as they were rested in his hoodie. It was then that I noticed his huge hunting knife sticking out from his hoodie's front pocket. In panic, I let out a gasp of fear and backed away, hitting my head hard on the doorknob behind me, which honestly made me dizzy. It was then that I found out the hard way that some places aren't meant to be visited. He leaned forward, his dark brown eyes and dirty face looking down at me through the glory hole. He didn't say a single word, and honestly he didn't have to, because as soon as he grinned, I heard someone trying to open the door of the room I was in a very harsh fashion. I quickly stood up and tried to think of a way to get myself out of the situation. There were no windows, and there was only one way out. To put the icing on the cake, I'd forgotten my phone back at the motel I was staying in. Thinking on my feet, I pretended to call the cops and spoke as loudly as I could whilst speaking to an imaginary object, hoping and praying to God they fell for it. Fall for it they did, but not before leaving me a message. As soon as I entered the stall a second time, to lock myself out even further in case they did break in, I saw the knife sticking out of the hole as the man continued to laugh like some sort of maniac before finally leaving. I waited for a few minutes before storming out and catching a cab to my motel. I ended up packing and catching bus back to Oklahoma the same hour, not wanting to spend another minute there. What weirds me out the most is the fact that as soon as I tried contacting Mary again on Facebook, she blocked me instantly, and my friends couldn't find her Facebook page either. So here I am, a few days later, still thinking about what could possibly happen to me had I not locked the door as soon as I entered. Now, I don't blame Mary nor anyone else for this, because no one forced me to try something like this out. I was just lucky enough to get through it and find a way out to tell the tale. I've got about 1 million of these Let's Not Meet experiences, but this is one of my favorites, and my brother's favorite story to tell his friends about me, so here goes. About 12 years ago, when I was 22, I worked at a video store. It was a few days before Halloween, and my manager asked me if I would work it since everyone else wanted it off. So, me being the good employee I am, I said yes and asked if I could dress up. She agreed and said I could dress up as whatever I wanted. Can I dress up as a chick? I was just joking, actually, until she told me I and didn't have the hair on my nuts to. Challenge accepted. I went out shopping and bought a wig, dress, and some makeup, and I borrowed a bra from my current crazy girlfriend at the time. I did my makeup the way I saw my girlfriend do it and proceeded to walk to work. Now, I only lived about a half-mile from the store, and since I lived within walking distance to everything, I didn't see the need for a car at the time. So I started walking. I had to cross the street, walk across a bridge, cut through an abandoned parking lot, and through an alley, and I was there. It was dark outside, but I've never had anybody bother me while I was ever out for a nightly walk. Until this night. About halfway across the bridge, I look up and see a man in his late 20s, maybe early 30s, walking towards me. As I get a little closer, I realize the fucker's checking me out. I giggle a little bit and laugh at the thought that I must make a pretty hot chick. I walk past him and continue on my way. As I walk and continue to let my mind wander in La La Land, I get through the parking lot and start down the alley when I hear someone say, "Hey, sexy girl," and I feel my ass get slapped. Not like a love tap, but full-blown, painful ass slap, the kind that leaves red marks. What the fuck? I yell as I turn around and confront this asshole and realize it was the punk I passed on the bridge. Oh shit. Man, sorry. He was obviously caught off guard. Looking back on it now, I can't stop laughing as I type this, but at the time I was beyond livid. I grabbed him by the cuff of his shirt and shoved him on the ground. I moved in to kick him a few times, but he was pretty quick to get on his feet and run away. He took off the way we came, repeatedly yelling, "Shit! Shit!" I stood there just stunned for another minute, thinking to myself, what in the hell just happened? I went into work, and as soon as my manager saw me, she started laughing. I didn't think you were actually going to do it. Of course, she laughed even harder when I told her about how I was almost sexually assaulted. I live in a somewhat populated city, in a fairly middle-class but not over-the-top neighborhood. You know, the kind where middle-aged housewives take their girlfriends and purebred house dogs out for runs or bike rides or whatever it is you do after binge drinking wine all morning long. Well, anyway, I was out on the sidewalk near my house tonight. It's somewhat cut off from the road, with a few sparse ponds and whatnot, but still available for golf carts and the like to cruise around. I had my phone flashlight on, per usual, so I'm more visible to drivers and more of their people out and about. At some point, I had zoned out and began to slightly notice a shadow creeping up on me. Male-sized, much taller and more built than me. No big deal, I thought. If I'm out this time of night, there's no reason other people shouldn't be allowed to be out either. It wasn't until I heard a booming male voice yelling something at me that I was in any way startled. After my headphones were out, I noticed the man's full demeanor in the dim streetlight above our encounter. Standing at well over 6 feet tall, at least 250 pounds, and very sloppy haircut and beard, he could have passed for homeless if it wasn't for one defining feature. He was dressed in a full wedding-style tuxedo. Keep in mind, this is a southern state and it's well over 90 degrees some nights here. He spoke again, this time louder, assuming I hadn't heard what he had said through my headphones. But I definitely heard it loud and clear, and hearing it a second time only made it more unsettling. "Do you know where the nearest daycare is?" Frozen in fear because it is definitely not common for strangers to stop other strangers in this town, I stuttered a bit and pointed in the direction ahead of us, explaining that I thought there might be one beside the Kroger. He simply smiled, waved, and replied, "Thank you, sir." As soon as his back was turned, I booked it the opposite direction, taking the back road to my house. Something was just off about the whole situation, from how he was dressed to his demeanor and very unsettling smile and tone. This man was definitely not drunk or under the influence of any drugs, by the way. His eerily calm voice and body language is probably what put me off the most. I could be overreacting, but my gut instinct was definitely screaming, "Get the fuck out of there," the whole time. I have to say, even after a year has passed, I feel almost guilty that this happened. I'm sorry to turn this into a weird personal thing, but I need to write it all out, even this weird prologue. So like I said, I feel guilty. I used to read the stories on this subreddit and wonder what it was like to have someone obsessed with you. As a girl who never had anyone pay attention to her in a weird and really, really fucked up way, I wanted something like this to happen to me. And I'm so sorry to anyone who's ever been harassed or stalked, because I was so wrong. And I'm sorry if this comes across as fake. I have no idea how to prove it. All I can do is tell you what happened. I live in a small town. There's not much to do. One of the things that attracts lots of kids is the pool. The pool building has lots of stuff like a concert venue, a skating rink, that kind of thing. That's where a young girl was first approached by a man. He said a few things, not a big deal. Then, when the same girl was leaving the pool, the man attempted to get her to get in his truck. The girl's sister came out of the building at the perfect time and got her out of that situation. I don't know a lot of specifics because that girl wasn't me. She was my next-door neighbor. So I noticed when the drive-bys started. We live on a dead-end street, so if someone drives down our street, they have to drive around the little circle at the end and go back. I'm up late often, and I noticed a red truck always driving by, pausing in front of that same girl's house and then continuing on. This was always sometime past midnight. During a football game when all the neighbors were gathered at the same house, I brought it up. The mother of the girl instantly went pale and asked for more information. I eventually had to talk to a police officer, but I didn't have much to tell them. I didn't know enough about vehicles to recognize make, but I described it to the best of my ability. Sadly, this didn't lead to anything except for an angry Facebook post from the mother's friend. The truck visits slowed after that, until midsummer. It was the middle of the day when the red truck stopped at the end of our street. A man got out and walked towards the girl's house. Her mom and her sister were gone for an appointment, and the girl was playing on the front lawn with a few of the other neighborhood kids. The man had his phone out and aimed at the kids. This is probably the dumbest decision I've ever made, but I love those kids, and I'm sorry that this sounds like I'm hyping myself up, but this is the truth. I've known them since they were babies. They play in our backyard, and I babysat them all, so I went outside and I asked the guy what he was doing. He was visibly put off and quickly said he needed directions to the center of town. I pointed him in the right direction, which is the direction he'd been coming from in the first place, and he left. I called the police after that, and I thought that'd be the end. I was wrong. The girl was left alone, but my hell had just begun. The red truck would be waiting outside my high school almost every day, at the edge of the lot where the school's cameras didn't reach. I parked in the upper lot, far away from him, so I was never really in danger, but it was still unnerving. A series of fake accounts tried to follow my Instagram, add me on Facebook, and follow me on Twitter. The bio lines at first were blank, but after I'd blocked them all, they began to get sinister. They were never threats. Instead, they were filled with personal details. My birthday, my phone number, my address. I told my parents immediately and took screenshots of all the accounts and went to the police, who took all the information but said that until a serious threat or something like that had emerged, they couldn't do anything. I feel no resentment towards the police, as I think their hands really were tied. In response, I took down all of my accounts and changed my number. By now, it was late fall, early winter. My car got keyed in my own driveway. Our front door would randomly be banged on in the middle of the night. A coworker at the store where I work told me a scruffy guy had come into our store, which was a knockoff Claire's type thing, so it was a little strange and just wandered around. Eventually, he'd asked when my next shift was. My coworker wouldn't tell him. He left without fuss. My school got a call that I had lice. I was called out of class and the rumor spread. Bizarre, but humiliating all the same. When I had to get the mail from the box at the end of the street, a car, and not the red truck, would drive slowly behind me and then drive away at a tire-squealing pace when I turned to see who it was. Eventually, after about a 3-month period of the events dwindling, they stopped altogether. I still have no idea why. I guess this has stuck with me so long because it kept changing. He never stuck to the same tactic long, kept changing it as if he was Googling creepy things to do to your stalking victim, and there was no real ending. And I'm aware that these were all tiny things, but they added up. About a year of my life was spent in constant suspense, and now I still always look over my shoulder. I won't go out alone after dark. I keep the shades in our living room closed after 7 p.m. Maybe the scariest thing was that I felt like I was doing everything right. I told my parents, I got proof, and I was still powerless. I'm just glad it's over.